Warning, this fic contains many dark and adult themes. For the full list provided by the author, please check the description below and proceed with caution. Welcome back, this is Falling for You by 1967 Hogwarts Goddess, a Percy Jackson fanfic. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoy and subscribe for future stories. Please check the description for a full list of tags and the link to drop a kudos for the original author. With that out of the way, let's get started. Chapter 59. Percy XXXVII. He had made the right decision. He had made the right decision. Percy repeated it over and over in his head as the door slammed shut behind him. He gripped the handle of his sword tightly, ignoring the startled looks from the demigods outside with a scowl. Waves of adrenaline tingled in his arms as he jumped the steps and headed straight back into the forest. The leaves crunched to dust under his feet and he saw birds fly out of their nests away from him. He had made the right decision. He had a goddess to kill. It was the only way to protect them. Why didn't she see that? He lashed out with his sword without thinking, slicing a small tree in half in his anger. Everything he'd done, it was like he was the bad guy here. He wasn't Luke. Luke betrayed them all. He had gone over to Kronos voluntarily. He hadn't had a choice about any of this. He kicked a rock further into the woods and the ground shook under his feet momentarily. The anger pooled in his gut shot up his throat, twisting his lips into a snarl. The deeper he got, the higher the trees stretched into the blue sky. They curved around him as he strode past. He could smell the smoke from further into the woods where the monster army lurked, from where apparently Octavian had burned down Thalia's tree. Thalia was going to be pissed about that. She'd definitely take Annabeth's side over his. Her allegiance had always been clear, as would Piper, Jason, and Leo. They'd known her longer than they'd known him. Hades, everyone at camp had, including Chiron and Claris. The Romans trusted Annabeth. She'd led them while he was in the pit. He was no longer their praetor either, so he'd lost Reyna too. So by extension, Hazel and Frank. Ironically, that probably only left Nico on his side, a resentful kid who had hated him for years and blamed him for the death of his sister. He didn't need them, he told himself. He'd made it this far without them. The rage washed down his arms again, barely even noticing that the forest around him grew quieter and darker with each step. He lashed out again, cutting through whatever blocked his path in blind anger. Now what would the Dryads say? Came a voice ahead of him, obscured by branches. Percy sliced them off in one powerful stroke. The sword reacted well with the sheer power bubbling underneath his fingertips, like it was melting into his very being with each blow, and the momentum that forced tsunamis through brick walls with ease was now his to control in his strikes. It almost felt overwhelming. Beyond the tree, he could now see the owner of the voice he had heard. Acles looked like a victim of famine. She had a dripping nose, sunken eyes, stringy gray hair matted to her head, and large amounts of dust covered her emaciated body. Bloody claw marks streaked down her cheeks and they dripped blood on her tattered dress. Dark red lurked behind her filthy nails, and Percy suspected with revulsion that she had been the one to inflict such wounds on herself. "You're Acles," he leveled his sword at her pathetic face. The woman nodded. Percy felt his lip curl into a nasty sneer. "You're the second wave, you, some minor goddess covered in dirt," he snorted humorlessly, Gaia's scraping the bottom of the barrel. He spun his sword in his hand. He was already making plans for what he was going to do after he killed her. He'd cut her head off, probably not give it to Annabeth, even though a wave of vindictiveness told him to, and then he'd go straight for Gaia. Maybe go around, he thought, marching towards Acles, who hadn't moved, cut through the ranks at the back and fight his way through to her. It was unlikely he'd have any other demigods as backup, but that didn't trouble him the way it might have done a year ago. "Foolish boy," Acles whispered as he got closer. The dust quivered at their feet. Fog swirled around them with a sound like agonized wailing. "Minor goddess, I was old before the Titans were born. I was old when Gaia first woke. Misery is eternal. Existence is misery. I was born of the eldest ones of chaos and night." Percy felt an unfamiliar shiver suddenly crackle down his spine. Her voice was like nails grating against a chalkboard. Hearing Acles speak, he no longer found it strange that she had clawed her own cheeks. The goddess radiated pure pain. She had suffered. She knew suffering. She was suffering. He blinked and glared at her to try and clear his head. "Which?" he hissed before realizing something. "Wait, if you're Nyx's kid, aren't you supposed to be on my side?" He gestured vaguely to the tattoo on his arm that twisted and moved on its own like smoke. "Nyx is my mother," Acles confirmed with a hand movement that could have been a gesture of respect, "but I am on the side of misery. Gaia will cause so much, I quite like the sound of that, she sighed almost wistfully. He narrowed his eyes, you're sick. The world is sick, she replied, and Percy dimly registered how foggy the area around them was getting. So many illnesses, so many wars without end. 1,000 innocents die for each soldier. The rich gorge themselves on guilt while the poor scrape together what little dignity they have left. A vicious cycle. I am the creation and the cause, and they all scream in my head without end. Percy raised his eyebrows and wrinkled his nose. Damn, he said before shrugging, sucks to be you. Ackley's turned that washed out and sunken gaze on him. Around the goddess, flowers bloomed in the dust, dark purple, orange, and red blossoms that smelled sickly sweet. Percy's head swam. You have your own fair share of pain as well, it seems. I'd hardly say it's fair. No one does, that's what makes it fair. You really enjoy this? Percy snapped and gestured around him with his sword, wondering why he hadn't just killed her already. You think this is all sunshine and rainbows? Beads of blood dripped off her jaw onto the leaves of the forest floor. Percy froze them to her face, but she didn't seem to care or even notice. He narrowed his eyes further at her as she continued speaking, almost rapturously. War is exquisite, hundreds of cries of agony all ringing out at the same time. You could all walk away unharmed, but it is in the nature of humans and immortals alike to stake their claim in misery for fleeting desires. Someone ate their dictionary for breakfast, he thought. When you die, suffering won't stop, will it? He said with doubt, raising his sword regardless. Misery is eternal, she replied, it cannot be killed. Oh, I beg to differ. Then beg, it makes no difference. Percy shrugged, not for you. He raised his sword, why was it down again, and pulled it back like a baseball bat. Oh, he was gonna enjoy this. Ackley stared up at him, and she really stared at him, hard. A shiver ran through him. It was like he was a book and she was flicking through the pages, walking across his grave unannounced. His hands trembled minutely. Do you know what happens after this for you? Ackley's murmured, making no effort to fend off the demigod poised to kill in front of her. Percy pulled a face. What? I've seen what happens. What will happen? I've felt it and I'll tell you. You kill Gaia, scatter her. She doesn't rise for many more millennia. The pit stays closed, her army is defeated, and you have her ichor spattered across your face, along with the blood of the demigods opposing you. But you tell me, do your friends see you as a hero or a murderer? What? Percy felt thrown. I don't know, I don't care, shut up. You then hand over your sword to the Olympians. It is the most powerful weapon ever made. They know it can kill them, know you can kill them. Only one person left knows how to make it, and he is also the only one who stands a chance in hand-to-hand combat. Do they destroy it or turn it on the final threat to their existence? Funny, he sniped, as if he had any intention of giving it up in the first place. He lifted his sword. Why hadn't he killed her yet? He could almost hear it slicing wetly through her neck, could hear the sound of her head hit the ground. You return to your mother. She knows you're not the little boy she raised. She knows you murdered him. When you scream in your sleep in a language she doesn't recognize, does she come to comfort the shell of her dead son, or does she lock her bedroom door with mournful tears? Something in Percy's chest echoed, like a muffled shout into an abyss. I said shut up, he snarled at her. You can't hide from me, Ackley said simply, the rasp of her voice prickling in his brain. I know you better than anyone. I have suffered what you have right beside you. I have felt your fear, your hatred, your desperation to live and your desperation to die. I know how this ends. Percy's arm shook. He waited for his temper to snap, waited for his vision to flood with red, for the burst of adrenaline that had fueled most of his recent slaughters. But the anger that had kept him going was no longer boiling under his skin but cold behind his eyes. His sword felt heavy in his hands, and suddenly the power flooding through him seemed a lot scarier than it had before. He felt small. You don't know anything, he snapped at her, and it was hollow anger that made everything around him seem artificial. You don't understand? Ackley's ran her bony hand up his sword arm to his shoulder, a mockery of comfort leaving trails of cobwebs in its wake. His skin crawled. I understand even more than you do yourself. You think if you can defeat Gaia that you will have proved something to yourself, that you could defeat the god of the pit if or when he comes looking for you. You think that you won't be so afraid anymore. I'm not. You are. Terror leaves your breaths heaving against your ribs. You're a child in a war you didn't start and can't end. So aggressive, so defensive, so curled up in on yourself like a wounded animal lashing out. You fear you've twisted yourself too far to go back but not far enough to win. But it's not about winning, all you want is comfort, to feel safe, to be protected. It is this that drives you insane in the end. But now who would protect you? You've pushed away your friends. That's not, he snapped. The rest of them fear you, think you have snapped. They don't trust you to watch their backs lest you put your sword through them. No, Percy tried to speak strongly but his voice cracked. No, they don't, he tried again, forcefully louder. His voice echoed firmly in their little clearing. Achilles paid it no mind. You already know your father never wanted you, that he doesn't love you. You are the biggest mistake of his immortal life and he told you this when you were a child. An unforgivable mistake on his part, he said. He is sorry you were born. Yes, he once had a hero son, victor of the Second Titan War, hailed as a champion of Olympus. He might have even felt pride. Now he sees a son dripping in blood, victor of each and every battle he enters, hailed and feared as the god-killer in the deepest parts of the underworld. He feels something else and it is not pride. Resignation, perhaps. He knows what he may have to do, has seen this before. He was unsure if he would see it with you, may have even truly believed in you, but who can deny what is right in front of them? Percy didn't speak. He didn't know how to argue back. It wasn't as if his father had ever seemed entirely happy he existed. The white fog around the two of them was almost opaque now, a smoky void creeping across the forest floor. Achilles still hadn't moved from her rock. Percy's limbs were heavy. He won't strike the final blow, Achilles said, her nails scratching light lines up and down his forearm, up and down, it stung. He can and he would, but he won't, for your mother, for whom you could have been had you not fallen. Then he'll visit her just the once after you're gone. She will slam the door in his face. She blames him, she blames you. She doesn't want to, but she can't help it. Her misery is a special kind, one of a parent who loses a child. There's no word for that, but a whole host of pains come with it, especially for one who had to watch her child die twice. Percy took a step back, and that one physical movement was enough to send a wave of fatigue through him. His trainer snapped a twig underfoot. The rest of the twigs left uncovered by the fog flickered into bones before his eyes, leaving him stood on hundreds of thousands of skeletons. He scrunched his eyes shut blearily. Stop this, he croaked, realizing for the first time that the plants that had sprung up around them were emitting toxic fumes, poisons. He could feel them burning acridly in his nose and lungs. If the goddess of misery could look gleeful, Percy guessed that would be what he could see in her torn face. You thought it would be easy, minor goddess, she made a noise like she was choking. Maybe she was laughing. You thought that I would unveil a weapon of my own, I would be overpowered in combat and you would land the final blow, she stated. At this she slid off her rock. She hobbled over to him, her face wincing as if she was walking with bare feet on broken glass. Percy's hand clenched thin air and he saw with a pit in his stomach that it was empty. His sword lay on the floor just out of reach from the trickles of poison that were eating away at the dead leaves on the ground with small hisses. It must have slid out of his hand. He knew he needed to pick it up, needed to fight, but he couldn't even get angry, couldn't access any passion. Not even a sense of protectiveness. What have you done? He whispered, his tongue heavy in his mouth as if speaking took a monumental effort. Misery, all that you have ever felt and all that you have ever caused. You walked in here a ticking time bomb with all the misery you hold within. I need no physical weapon. Suffering cuts as deeply as a knife, deeper. The weight on his shoulders and swimming in his head had him pressing a hand to the ground to steady himself, sank into a wobbling crouch. He looked at the streams of poison around him. Streams, water, he knew what he could do. He could force her to her knees with her own ichor. She was a primordial, but less so it would be easier with her. Gaia was a physical entity, the very earth. Misery was a very real but very intangible concept. He could funnel her own poisons into her mouth, nose, eyes, ears, could fill up her sinuses and choke her to death, leaving her small, dusty body to rot in the woods. But Percy had the misery of what felt like thousands of souls building up in him, pressing against his chest and numbing his limbs. It felt like it was blocking out everything. He couldn't even feel anger towards Achilles, he was so drained. He fell backwards and landed in a sitting position. Access to any emotions at all beyond crippling and depressive lethargy had been cut off. He watched the poison consume a log like acid. Percy couldn't fight this. This wasn't something he could just stab his way through, and he distantly realized just how much he had underestimated the goddess of misery. Achilles sat on the ground by him. At the end, there's one last obstacle, she said. The one thing that matters perhaps the most. You fight for each other, she fights for you, you fight for her. What happens when she decides that maybe you're the one she should be fighting instead? I don't want to know, Percy whispered. Achilles sighed deeply next to him as if she had just sunk into a hot bath. She must be enjoying this, he thought, and he wrapped his arms around his legs. He was so tired. She's the one to strike the final blow, Achilles said. You are consumed by hatred, your eyes and soul black as the night sky. Only love could put an end to it for good. And she used to love you, she did, more than the moon and the stars themselves. She's the only one who doesn't blame you, not even a little. Percy's breaths came in juddery. He held on tighter to his legs and rested his chin between his knees. She blames herself? You did all of this to save her at the very start at least. Maybe if she had been with you, she thinks things would be different. Whether that would mean that she would have gone feral as well, she doesn't know, but if the two of you were together, she thinks she might not have cared, but you weren't. So when she stabs you in the chest, you rip out her throat with your teeth. Percy felt his eyes well up. Her funeral is big, she's the hero. He felt like he couldn't move. Your body is quietly burnt by Hephaestus on Zeus' orders. No one objects, they wish they wanted to. You fell further than any demigod has ever fallen. No one breaks the news to your mother until Poseidon shows up a year later, but she knew. In her heart she already knew that her little boy was long gone. Whatever crawled out of the pit in his body wasn't him. Percy's hands shook. He pressed his forehead into his knees. Your soul screams murder from the fields of punishment for the rest of eternity. Sometimes Hades and Persephone hear it from their palace. They flinch as they are reminded of the desperate young man who traded his morality for the life of the one he loved. Achilles' clawed hands came to rest on his wrists again. She traced vertical lines up and down. Do you want me to do it? Her whisper made his body shake again. It seemed like kindness, but Percy knew it was not. A choice was just more misery. Everything was just more misery. Murderer, Achilles murmured in his ear, digging her nails in. Godkiller. Executioner. Even the brightly colored poisonous plants had started to fade into gray. Give up, Percy Jackson, Achilles soothed him. Isn't death better than what awaits you? Percy tried. A tear slipped down his cheek. Paws off, Grandma, bellowed a voice to his left as the last of Percy's vision faded. There was an almighty scream in front of him, and everything snapped back into technicolor vision. Percy blinked. The birds cawed wildly, wings flapping madly through the trees as Achilles wailed again, staring in horror at the sword tip protruding from her chest. The sword yanked out a second later, and Percy closed his eyes as the familiar heat rushed over his face, the white light blinding behind his eyelids. Reality hit him like a slap in the face. When he opened them again, he stared. He was sat on the ground of the forest. Without the goddess around, the air seemed thinner, beams of light actually making it through the overhead canopy. Bugs dashed around. The fog and poison had disappeared, though the burn marks remained from where it had eaten into the leaves. Achilles' empty body was slumped over. There was a fallen tree acting as a bridge across the charred floor. It was probably how she had got across. Annabeth was talking rapidly, wrapping something around one of his wrists. He didn't know what she was saying yet, but was content to just hear her voice. Her eyes met his nose stung. Percy! You rip out her throat with your teeth. His eyes welled up again. She looked at him in alarm and dropped to her knees in front of him. Hey, she said softly, resting her hand on his arm, and that was it for him. His forehead hit her shoulder as her arms came up around him. And he cried. Great sobs racked his body, but Annabeth held on like a lighthouse in a storm. Her hand came up to rub his back. He cried into his hands, clenching his eyes shut and just letting go. Wave after wave of misery flowed out of him. Holding on to her tightly with agitation, he was helpless to hold back his tears. He cried for what could have been, what could still be, and what was. It's all right, Annabeth murmured into his hair. I knew you weren't okay, but whatever's going on, we can fix it. I'll help you fix it. You're not alone anymore. Percy couldn't help but choke up at that even more. He was wrong. He was so wrong before he needed her. He needed her so much. He held onto her waist, afraid to let go. She was warm, and her shirt smelled like paper and washing powder, making Percy lightheaded with familiarity. After a few minutes that could have been hours, Annabeth began talking quietly to him. Her hand was in his hair now, slowly running through it in calm motions. His cheeks felt drenched. He sniffed, his shoulders shivering. He hadn't cried like that since he had found out Annabeth had died, but before that, before this quest, it felt like years. This had been long overdue. Hey, screw Achilles, Annabeth said emphatically with tiny shakes. Screw her, she's a psycho who scratches her own face up. Who are you gonna listen to, her or me? Percy held her tighter and kissed her shoulder. Good answer, she mumbled into his hair. He breathed in the smell of her shampoo and almost cried again. Snuffling only a little bit, he very unwillingly pulled away from Annabeth, knotting the twin wet blobs on her shirt with a hint of guilt. When he looked up, her gaze was full of concern and none of the anger that had been there earlier. He too felt distinctly calmer. The power under his skin had lulled. The anger in his chest felt a little further away. Percy did the one thing he didn't think even Gaia had anticipated him to do. He broke down. "Annabeth," he mumbled, "I'm so sorry." Whatever she had been expecting, he clearly surprised her. She blinked and he realized they were holding hands still. "Percy!" "I'm so sorry," he choked on his sob, another tear streaming down his face. "Please don't go, please don't leave me alone." "I've got you," she murmured fiercely, reaching forwards for a hug, wrapping her arms tightly around him. "I've got you, it's okay, I won't leave you, I'll never leave you." "I don't want to fight." He spoke up and he meant it more than anything, feeling drained of all the arrogance he had marched in here with. "I don't want us to fight. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you, I'm sorry I made you uncomfortable. I'm sorry I scared you, I didn't mean to, I don't want to." "Percy, slow down," Annabeth cupped his cheek. "It's all right, it's just you and me, breathe." "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the blood," he continued regardless. "I should have, but I was scared and I don't want to stop using it or have everybody look at me like I was, but I also don't want to lose you." "No one else knows about it but us," she said, easing him out of her hug, rubbing her thumb over his hand. He sniffed hard. He shook his head. "Too late, the whole of the pit knows, Gaia knows, she'll tell everyone, tell the gods." "Then we tell them first." Percy shook his head without realizing, then stopped. He sighed, dropping his head down low. He wiped his cheeks roughly. "I love you," he said. "I want to tell you everything, but there are things I don't want anyone to know. There are things that I and people thoughts, and I don't even know how I feel anymore about it all, but it's not what you might want me to feel, and I know there are things I should regret, but I don't end." "Percy, breathe. How are you supposed to apologize to me if you keep going purple?" Annabeth gripped him strongly and gave him a look. He stopped and breathed in and out deliberately. A very small smile made its way onto his face, but just for her, only for her. "There we go," she murmured, "and I love you too, you idiot." As if she couldn't stop herself, she leant forwards and kissed him gently. His cheeks heated up. He rested his forehead on hers after. "Did you hear any of what she said?" he asked. "I heard her ask you if you wanted to do something," Annabeth said a little uncertainly, "and then a couple bits after that, she started digging her nails into you and I might have lost it," she added sheepishly, but holding up his right arm as evidence where Percy could see 4 livid scratches from elbow to wrist. They were bleeding sluggishly and stung. He frowned, he hadn't even felt it. "You killed her," he realized. Annabeth chewed her lip as she looked at the body behind them. "Yeah," she said in an odd voice, "guess I did." She looked at him. "Some guy I know told me she was a pushover, so I thought I'd come and test out his theory." Percy smiled at her. "Maybe it only applies to you." "Lucky me," Annabeth smiled back before she looked back again. "It was weird, I didn't think it would be that." "Easy?" he asked. She looked at him with dawning realization. It was like she was seeing him in a new light. Percy nodded, he understood. "How many? No, actually yeah, I'll say it, let's just go for honesty here. How many gods did you kill downstairs?" Annabeth asked. Percy looked away. Apate, weird god guy who Percy actually thought might have been Maros, the god of doom, Adiphagia and Euclea, was that it? Were there any more? He couldn't remember. He might have killed a few indirectly when he accidentally trashed the pit. He didn't know. "4, I think," he said. Annabeth raised her eyebrows. "Geez." Percy's throat was tight. "That's why down in the pit," he began, desperate to start getting things out, to stop feeling like he was the only one holding it all together, "they started calling me Godkiller. I dunno who started it actually, no, it might have been Nyx, I don't know, but Gaia knows too, they all do." "Godkiller?" Annabeth ran a hand through her hair. Percy couldn't swallow the lump in his throat. "That's going to be difficult, to say the least, to introduce without judgment from the gods. They might take it a little personally." Percy acknowledged with his head down. "And there's more, there's so much more, I want you to understand, but I don't know how to, I don't even know where to begin." "The start." He shook his head. "It wasn't too bad at the start. Well," he choked a little, "as far as too bad goes, the Cocytus nearly did me in first." "How about you tell me something small, I want to understand, like why you can't say the name of the pit." "Oh. No," Percy shook his head instantly. "No, that's probably the worst. There's a reason, Annabeth, and it's a big one. I don't want to think about that for a while, ever. A shudder ran through him. Annabeth held up her hands in surrender. Could Gaia at least use it against you? Percy bit his lip. Yeah, probably, most likely. But Annabeth, you can't imagine, he trailed off, red-rimmed eyes large, trying to convey what he couldn't say. She got it. Okay, come on then, hit me with the worst, she said, crossing her legs as if to brace herself for it, her gray eyes wide but wary. The trees creaked around them in a slight breeze, and he almost felt like he and Annabeth were 14 again, lying on the summer grass together playing truth or dare. You don't want it, he replied. I don't want to unload all of this on you. Then tell me something small. Okay, he breathed. Okay, he had no clue where to start. This was about getting it out in the open. What had he never told anyone else? What was important but wasn't going to make Annabeth run for her life? He looked at her and caught the slight flicker of her glance over his scarred eye. Oh, there was that. I got locked up a couple times, he said, vaguely waving his previously chained arm which still displayed vivid red scars around the wrist. They made me do this whole fight to the death thing in this arena against a bunch of monsters. That's how I got this, he said, pointing at his eye. Antaeus, he had a bit of a vendetta against me, son of Poseidon type beat. He was trying to kill me and well, he didn't, I just wasn't quick enough. But then I stabbed him in the neck, so I reckon we're even. Her blonde hair shone in the sun, he observed. Okay, she nodded, complete acceptance. Percy didn't deserve her. That's nowhere near the worst thing, he sighed. Annabeth, I don't even feel bad about some things, but I know you will. I don't want. He let his hands wave for a second aimlessly before letting them drop. Percy, I keep thinking about this and I think you've been desensitized to it all. Post-traumatic stress. I should have expected this. It's basic psychology, she explained. She held his gaze strongly. You think I'm underreacting? Percy screwed up his nose. I think you've been deprived of a normal reaction to compare your own to, she said, and Percy wondered how long this had been bouncing around in her head for. It wasn't as if any of us were down there with you. Like, did anyone down there ever make you feel bad for stuff you did? Percy racked his brain. I don't know, they were all doing some pretty dodgy things of their own. Exactly, Annabeth clicked. Observation and imitation. So I went native. Basically, Annabeth nodded with a sympathetic wince. Oh great, am I cured now, Dr. Chase? He smiled at her and she grinned back. Shut up, I'm not diagnosing you, I'm just saying, you went all monkey see monkey do in Tartarus and this is the result. Percy flinched and Annabeth was quick with her apology. Sorry. It's fine, Percy sighed. Fine, you asked, okay, so I don't know, I made friends with this dude called Damieson down there. Annabeth raised her eyebrows. The giant, the anti-Ares, oh does that mean he's nice then? Yeah, Percy said. That's not bad. No, that's not all of it, Percy said, thinking about one certain event. He thought about it quite a lot. We were in this one fight and he got hurt bad, couldn't move bad, and I thought about leaving him alone in the middle of nowhere because he was slowing me down. That felt bad then and it feels bad now. But did you? Well no, but that's not bad either then. When he was killed, I tortured the Cyclops that killed him to death with his own blood. Annabeth's mouth made an O shape. She nodded vaguely, eyebrows slowly raising. Oh, she said slowly. I don't regret that part though, he added because he needed to get that out there. He killed my friend. A Cyclops killed a giant. Annabeth screwed up her nose suddenly and of course that's what she narrowed it down to. Percy shrugged. I thought it was weird too, but I think the rules up here aren't the same down there. Weird, okay, she urged. Keep going. You sure? Yes. I exploded a goddess from the inside out with her ichor. Boom, he added humorlessly and winced at the wide-eyed stare he met. Exploded her. Yeah, she was trying to drag me off. I was hanging on to this stalactite. It was like a 200-story drop. It's complicated, and she was hanging on to my leg. And that killed her. You said you could kill them with your sword. Oh. And this way too, like blood, but it's ichor. If you pull enough out of them, they just... I get it, she said bluntly before rubbing a thumb in between her eyebrows. Do you regret it? No. Okay, give me worse. Annabeth. Come on, I don't like all this stuff between us. If we get it out, they can't use it against us. Percy stared at her. How are you this calm about it now? He said. Annabeth looked down at her hands. I'm not, but as soon as you walked out those doors I wanted you to come back. I wanted to march right out there after you. It feels like all we've done for the past year is get separated. By Hera, by the pit, by death, I don't want us to be on opposite sides anymore. I still feel pretty uncomfortable about this, and I don't think it's healthy for you, but I'm not letting you go through this alone because that is exactly what Gaia wants. You've done that enough. And so help me, I trust you. If you say you know what you're doing, I believe you. You're not getting out of this that easy, seaweed brain. Percy kissed her softly. He rested his forehead against hers. He hoped he knew what he was doing too. I just want you with me. I don't know what answers you want from me, wise girl. Percy's hands were clenched and shoved tightly under his thighs. It's just He cut himself off with a grim pause. Annabeth took hold of his hands instead, withdrawing them firmly. What I did, it wasn't just what I had to do, some of it, a lot of it. It was what I wanted to do. I wanted to hurt them, to kill them, and if it was what I needed to do to survive as well, then great. 2 birds with 1 stone, he said, breathing in and out slowly to bring himself back a little. All those monsters down there, everything they've ever done to us, it was like karma, you know. Annabeth began to chew her lip, something she only did when she was thinking hard. Percy looked away, eyebrows furrowed, and glared at an innocent tree to take out his frustrations. Both their hands twisted in their grip, but neither let go. I know what you see when I tell you stuff like this, he confessed quietly, but all I see is me on my own, just trying to survive and get even. His voice came out quiet the next time he spoke. A lot of people down there wanted to hurt me, Annabeth, and some got lucky. I didn't, so when I got the chance to hurt them back, he trailed off helplessly. Annabeth didn't speak for a minute. Keep going, she said eventually. Tell me something you know I won't like. Percy closed his eyes and scowled. You won't look at me the same, he said. Annabeth, I know they seem all out of the blue to you, but when I say that I couldn't think of anything else to do, you know, odds are there wasn't a better option available, or I didn't have you to think of a better way. I believe you, Annabeth said, and he looked her dead in the eye. She really trusted him. Maybe he could do the same with this. He didn't know. For someone who claimed to have minimal regrets, it wasn't half hard for him to tell Annabeth about them. There's a lot of things. Reel them off for me then, rapid fire, judgment-free zone. She held up her hands like an oath. Annabeth, I'm pretty sure over half of these are war crimes. I'm not gonna snitch on you. He smiled at her before taking a deep breath. Okay, but can we head back as we talk? I don't want to be here anymore, and I might have forgotten to put on my armor. No problem, she snorted, and he caught her eyes flickering to Ackley's. I don't want to be here anymore either. They stood up and Percy offered out his hand to her. She looked at it for a beat, then reached up slowly and took it. Their fingers laced naturally. It doesn't feel like you're killing a god, does it? He murmured. No, she replied quietly. That's what made it easy. It was just like another monster. Maybe that's why I don't feel bad. Maybe, she said. Finding their way back wasn't hard. Annabeth had raised her eyebrows at path of destruction. Percy had hacked through the trees, and he shrugged, a little sheepish. He let his thoughts run straight out of his mouth. I cut out a titan's liver, he told her as they walked. Okay, she nodded. Why? This witch wanted it, and I needed her to get out of the labyrinth. You were in the labyrinth? Yeah. I kind of caved the ceiling of the pit in and climbed out. I thought I'd just pop out onto the surface or something, but no, big surprise. Makes sense though, she mused before her brow furrowed and she gave him a look. Caved in the ceiling. Earthquake like MT St. Helens, no other choice, he said before the ghost of a grin crept up his face. I really left that place a mess. Good, she squeezed his hand. What else? He thought aloud, still holding a couple things close to his chest. Like what happened to Koyos, like the voice, like the god of the pit. He felt so much lighter telling her everything, but some stuff would have to wait. I don't know. I threw Camper in the sticks after I got the blessing, but I don't think I'll ever feel bad about that. You got the Achilles curse back. Briefly, he conceded. I didn't know you fought Camper, Annabeth said, frowning, and Percy could tell she was thinking about the time the two of them had gone head-to-head with her. It hadn't gone well. I had a Titan, a giant, and the Meonian Draken on my side, Annabeth, don't worry. Titan. Oh. Do you remember what I told you about that time Nico, Thalia, and I fought Olympus? Vaguely, you threw him in the Lethe. Yeah, wiped his memory. I told him his name was Bob. Well, Bob turned up downstairs and I convinced him to fight with us for a bit. We lost him in the fight against Campare. I'm sorry, Annabeth said tactfully. Me too. Their shoulders bumped together instinctively. Percy felt a small, sad feeling in his stomach as he thought of Bob. I convinced him to kill Hyperion, Percy remembered. It all felt like so long ago. He frowned. He may not have really remembered who he was, but I made him kill his brother. Do you feel bad about it? Percy winced. Not really, I could barely walk. If Hyperion had got to me before Bob got to him, I'd be done for. She gave him a look that screamed, explain now. Have you ever heard of the Ere? He asked. Annabeth pulled a face. They're spirits of curses. He nodded, grimacing. Yeah, nasty things, kill one and if anyone's ever cursed you they pass it on to you. She gave him a wincing twitch of a smile. How many did you kill? She asked. Lost count, he returned guiltily. 10, I only got 9 curses though, reckon one of them forgot, but they nearly got me. Broken leg, stabbed in the chest, concussion. Some people really weren't my biggest fans. Die immortals, Percy, she sighed. Damason saved me, I was fine, and we got Meyer out of it too, he said, thinking fondly about the beast. Hey, how did she? She hitched a ride on Claris's ship, Annabeth reassured him. Apparently a little scary to sleep near, but ultimately not a problem. I heard her and Claris get along like a house on fire. Percy frowned. Draken Stealer, he grumbled. That's not supposed to be part of the plan. What is the plan? Annabeth asked him curiously, something she didn't ask him often. Kill Gaia, he said instantly. That would never change. A flicker of anger sparked back to life in his chest. What, like in combat? She doesn't seem to be the fighting type. Percy, Annabeth frowned. She manipulates people to fight for her instead. That was true. It seemed like all Gaia had done was throw enemy after enemy at him, like a test. Then I'll catch her by surprise, he said slowly. Good one. No, I'm serious, he said, stopping her with wide eyes as quite possibly the stupidest and most dangerous plan he had ever thought of started to build up in his mind. And I think I know how to do it as well. And we've already got everything we need. Think about it, we already know what she wants. We know how she manipulates. She's the one who sent Acles and thinks that she has all of our fates planned out. We know what she expects, so we give her it. Annabeth stared at him warily. She's done all of this with one goal in mind. Well, he amended, 2 if you count the destruction of the earth, but that's irrelevant right now. She wants me. He held her hands tightly and stared at her, hoping desperately that she would get what he left unspoken. With a twitch of her face, she gave him a questioning look followed by a glare. When that said, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, I think I'm going to kill you. Percy gave her a tiny apologetic nod of confirmation. Understanding flooded through her face and she swore out loud. If they were both 12 again, he'd be anticipating a punch to the arm any second now. But Annabeth's eyes began to sparkle as they settled onto the same wavelength. It was a stupid plan, it was a laughable plan, and their odds of failing with intensely fatal results were incredibly high. But that just summed up every plan they'd ever made together. The pair shared a mischievous look, and suddenly Percy felt months of pain lift off of him. It was like they had never been separated. Okay, Annabeth said, so let's give you to her. Chapter 60. Percy XXXVII. Stood in his cabin with arms outstretched, Percy went over the plan one more time as Annabeth tightened his armor. It was good armor, brand new from Leo. The dark gray metal looked tough and cold, but it just reminded Percy of Annabeth's eyes. Her tongue was stuck out in concentration as she moved to the strap around his ribs. He winced as it pressed on healing bruises. If you could not break my ribs, that would be really nice, he told her. Baby, Annabeth stated without even looking at him. Now come on, pay attention. I am, he complained. I get what we need to do, I just don't like your additions. My additions, Annabeth said, tugging particularly sharply on a strap at the back, are what's gonna sell this plan believably. We've been over this. Yeah, I know, but do I really have to? Yes. Why can't I just? She circled around and looked him dead in the eye. Her glare could normally stop a whiny camper in their tracks through intimidation, but Percy stopped talking just so he could smile softly at her. He loved her so much. She rolled her eyes but kissed him anyway. I'll be fine, she said firmly. You worry about you. Percy sighed. Fine, but I want to make it really clear that I don't and won't like it. You think I'm gonna like my part? She asked him with eyebrows raised. Percy grinned and tilted his head to the side. On some level, probably. Annabeth snorted. In theory, but not in real life, she finished seriously before giving him a once-over. Am I good? He asked, reluctantly spinning in a slow circle when she twirled her finger. Almost. You'll sell it more when you're fighting. Percy looked in the mirror of his cabin. He thought he looked fine. Annabeth had insisted with no small amount of blushing that he switch his camp shirt for a plain black t-shirt. She hadn't looked impressed when he had ripped the sleeves off of that top too, but it wasn't Percy's fault his clothes didn't fit him anymore. And she had agreed that it would be better for his full tattoo to be on show, both of them even going so far as to leave off the shoulder plate and vambrace on that arm. The blue jeans stayed on, a little crushed by the dark gray greaves on his shins. His squeaky trainers would also remain, quite a lot less white than they had been several hours ago. They'd left his hair as it was. I can't wait to have a haircut after this, he grumbled, rubbing a hand over his hair. His fingertips were still stained black. Me too, Annabeth said, her gaze catching on the bronze hippocampi decorations Tyson put up years ago before snapping her fingers. And I've just realized what we're missing. A burger, he said hopefully, a nap, Gaia's head on a pike. Close, stay here, I'll be right back. She sprinted out of his cabin. Percy sat down on the edge of his bed, careful not to smack his head on the underside of the upper bunk. His fingers tapped on his legs restlessly. His eyes wandered along all the brightly colored sea plants and corals sitting on the windowsill. He could see the sea through the windows, could smell the salt. This had seemed like a good plan at first, but as the time to fight came closer, Percy was becoming less and less sure of it. They had a plan which seemed like a first for Percy in a while, but sticking to it was going to be difficult. He'd had a plan of his own all the way up till Ackley's find Gaia and skin her alive. It thrummed through his veins even now considering that a new plan was in place, similar but smarter, he and Annabeth combined. This way was somehow both a little less and a lot more likely to get him killed. He clenched his jaw and his leg began to bounce. But so long as he took Gaia with him, right? He immediately thought of Annabeth. He couldn't lose her now. Dying would mean losing her. He chewed his lip. He wanted more than anything to just grab his swords, hunt Gaia down and go crazy. It's what he would have done in the pit. There was nothing to hold him back down there. But up here, after everything, he couldn't do that. He couldn't go off on his own anymore. He had people to protect. He'd promised Annabeth that they would do this together. Which was more important, destroying Gaia or sticking to their plan? As soon as an obviously correct answer came into his head, the other idea called to him. It felt like he couldn't do one without having to do the other. Percy just hoped the plan would work. He saw blonde hair moving past the windows and stood up. Annabeth closed the door behind her. Guess what? She said as she walked over to him with a small bowl in hand. You're pregnant, Percy said casually. No. I'm pregnant, he pretended to gasp, and Annabeth snorted. Yeah, twins, she grinned. What do you want to name them? He said, complying as Annabeth ushered him towards the mirror. How about I just saw and Travis and Katie kissing? Percy raised his eyebrows and turned his head. No way. Yeah way, she replied. Thought they'd never realize, he mused. Now or never, I guess. The playful tone in the room dropped a little at that, and Percy decided to change the subject. What's with the bowl? Annabeth held it up, and Percy furrowed his brow at the black powder inside. Coal dust, she said, from the fireplace in the big house. Okay, Santa, I get I haven't exactly been the best kid recently, but... Beat it, Dumbo, it's for your face. The same war paint you were wearing when you popped out the ground in Athens. It really helped the whole unstable crazy guy vibe you were rocking. Percy snorted. I'm down, he admitted. I did actually kinda like it. It had made him feel tougher and braver. Weirdo. You just want to paint my face, he leveled at her with a smirk. You just want me to paint your face, she countered him with, and against all reason he felt his cheeks get warm. Yeah, you just want me to paint my face. And you just want me to want me to paint your face. And you just want me to want to, he froze, and his girlfriend grinned as she began to finger paint the stuff around his eyes. Percy swore quietly. Almost, he whispered. Not even close, she assured him. I got distracted, he defended. By what? She scoffed derisively. His face went red, their eyes met, her cheeks went pink. "Get your head in the game, Jackson," she mumbled, but her eyes shone. "Now stop blinking, I'm trying to make this look scary." Her fingers were soft against his face, sliding up and down over his eyelids. Her touch crossed over his eyebrows and on to his forehead before dusting down towards his cheeks. He felt her swipe out in small flicks and couldn't help but smile as her imagined the look of concentration on her face. "Jackson," he heard her warn and bit his lips together to stop ruining her canvas. She dabbed it from the outside corners of his eyes towards his hairline before going back and piling it on around his eyes more. He could feel the warmth radiating off of her. He wondered how close she was standing to him. Was she on her tiptoes? "Percy, if you don't stop smiling, this is gonna be all messy and you'll look less like the guy who killed Porphyrion and more like I just sat here throwing lumps of coal at your face." He opened his eyes and found her grinning straight at him. "Hey," she complained. Percy went for the kiss, and when he pulled back, he couldn't help but snigger at the smear of black on her cheek. "Oh great, now I look like a thug too," she said, rubbing at it in the mirror. He glanced up and gave his face a once-over. Oh yeah, this was good. The coal dust worked perfectly, a thick black cutting over his eyes and spiking out viciously. It was better than the stripes he had before. The whites of his eyes now looked a little too white, the greens a little too green. The faded splatters of red across his face that remained from his hunt of the traitor demigods had been tactfully left as they were. He looked like the type of guy his mother would make him cross the street to avoid. And he liked it. "You sure you're not a daughter of Aphrodite?" he said, tilting his face left and right to get clearer views. "This is pretty good." "I'm flattered," Annabeth said in a deadpan voice, "but I copied that from a war documentary I saw. A guy in the army was wearing it." Percy thought about that. "I was planning on joining the army once," he said. "Really?" Annabeth looked up at him in surprise. "You've never told me that before." "It was years ago," he said. "When I first got to camp and thought my mum was dead, I thought I was an orphan, remember? I would have had to have gone and lived with Gabe. I was gonna pretend I was 17 and join the army." Annabeth couldn't restrain a giggle. He turned on her, amused. "What?" he said. "You were gonna pretend to be 17 when you were 12, she laughed into her hands. "Hey, do you know you were so 5'2"? Come on. Do you remember when I was taller than you? You were so angry and in short she tried to rein herself in. Percy crossed his arms. "You done?" Annabeth nodded, then snorted, then composed herself, then giggled again. He grinned at her and wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off the ground to his 6-foot height. She shrieked. "Who's short now, huh?" he said with a wide grin. Annabeth said something muffled into his chest plate. He put her down. "What did you say?" he said. "Nico," she offered, and they both cracked up a little. "Fair," he said, "fair, but hey, it was all I could think of at the time. Didn't realize I was signing up to fight a war anyway." Her smile faltered, and die immortals, that wasn't what he meant to do. "True," she said, "none of us did." Percy stared at the floor. "Yeah." A moment passed before the girl was in his arms again, a little gentler this time. Their armor clanked against each other's and his vambrace was definitely cutting into his skin, but he just rested his chin on the soft waves of blonde hair against his neck. The wooden floorboards creaked under them. Percy opened his mouth to speak but found he didn't really have anything to say, so he just held her a little tighter, and the way she burrowed into him meant that she had heard him regardless. And then he mentally smacked himself on the forehead. Of course he had something to say. But Annabeth beat him to it. "I love you," she murmured into his skin. "I love you too," he replied simply, quickly, easily. It was the same as breathing for the two of them. It was the one thing that would never change. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. It was almost like the war on their literal doorstop had vanished for a second. But Percy could still hear faint snarls and chants far away, could see campers running back and forth outside holding stacks of swords to be sharpened and orders being barked by was that Reyna? Probably. He didn't want to be the one to break the hug. Annabeth didn't seem to want to be either. "Annabeth. I know." Neither moved. Percy was too aware that the next time they might see each other might be the last. He cupped her cheek, feeling the warm blood flowing through her skin. Literally, it was reassuring. "Percy. I know." They let go of each other and it hurt something inside of his chest. They both stood up a little taller. Annabeth reached for her dagger to sheath it, and Percy did the same, grabbing his own and slipping it over his head. He tightened it over his chest and back before slipping Adamas in there, then Riptide as a backup in his jean pocket. It felt like it should be strange to not fight with Riptide as his main weapon, but he had fought with Adamas for so long that the two felt very similar. His hands had grown to adapt to the weights and balances of both. That and Riptide wouldn't cut it in a final fight like this. He didn't need his childhood sword for this. He needed something lethal. "This isn't going to be fun," he heard Annabeth say as she glanced out the window. "It's a war," he said. "Not that." He nodded. "The plan." "Stupid plan," she grumbled as he reached over to help her tighten her greaves. "Stupid plan," he agreed. "Hey, that's my plan you're talking about." He snorted. They stood in front of the door and sighed in unison. Annabeth poked her finger at a spiral seashell sticking out of the gray stone wall. Percy himself had tried to yank that out when he was younger to no avail. Then she turned and kissed him one last time. "This is gonna work," she told him with finality. "I know," he said before adding, "it better for the bobbies." He put his hands over his stomach. Annabeth laughed. He smiled at her. Composing herself, she put her hand on the door handle. "Wait," he said, "shouldn't you go out there?" He jerked his thumb to the window. Annabeth clicked her fingers. "Good thinking." As if steeling herself, she drew up to her full height, nodded once at him, then walked over to the window and jumped out. Percy had to consciously remind himself that his cabin was as it always had been, a bungalow. He checked his swords absent-mindedly. His fingers caught on the camp necklace around his neck and his eyes flew open. There was no way he could wear this into battle. If he lost it again, Percy untied the back hurriedly. Why were Annabeth's not so difficult? And placed it on his pillow. Then he walked back to the door and counted to 100, or as close as he could get. Somewhere, maybe around 90, he couldn't take it anymore. He breathed in a full, strong breath and opened the door, striding out. They had agreed that wearing a helmet wouldn't work for the plan, but Percy wished he had one as he was faced with waves of milling demigods gawping at him as he marched towards the pavilion. Clearly, they had all been let out of the Zeus cabin now. He found the scowl on his face came easier than he had expected. Spotting Chiron's tail sticking out from behind a pillar, he found the rest of the seven, including Annabeth, who was talking to a thankfully awake and seemingly recovered Piper. As if she had been there the entire time, Reyna, Nico, a handful of hunters, and most of the other counselors and centurions. He glanced once towards the tree line at the other end of the field, and knew that the figure sat on the throne was watching him. His skin crawled. Conversation grinded to a halt as Percy came and sat down, choosing a seat as far away from Annabeth as he could. He saw the shadows flicker around him. Chiron started speaking again, but it seemed to be a topic that mostly the centurions were discussing. No one else seemed to be either aware or acknowledging that Gaia was watching them. Percy felt his fingers start to tap the undersides of his legs involuntarily. Next to him, Nico didn't seem to bat an eyelid, but Leo was openly starring. Percy met his stare. Leo shrugged and held up his hands in defeat but sent him a wary glance before looking away. "And the situation with the second wave, Percy?" He looked at Chiron. "Yes." "Achilles," Chiron's tone rose at the end, a little hopefully, though Percy wasn't sure what he was hoping to hear. "Dead," he said bluntly, "good riddance too." A wave of unease rippled through the group, but no one said anything except Clarice, who slapped her knee and nodded. She didn't look him in the eye, though. "Good," she said, "one less thing to worry about, right?" She directed this to the group and was met with mixed reactions. She turned to Annabeth. "Right." "Don't care," Annabeth said shortly and without emotion. "Can we just get on with this?" Her tone and blatant ignoring of Percy sent a shiver running up his spine. Oh, he did not like that. It clearly didn't sit well with the others either, and he even saw Chiron looking heartbrokenly between the two of them. Hazel was frowning sadly, but Piper caught Percy's eye, and though she narrowed them initially, they widened a little after a beat. He glimpsed the barest hint of a wink from her as she looked away. Gods of Olympus, she was a daughter of Aphrodite, of course she'd know. He cracked his knuckles nervously, and a centurion opposite him suddenly looked as if he would much rather be somewhere else. "What do you propose, Annabeth?" Chiron asked her gently. "Yeah, Annabeth," Percy thought, "hurry up." Annabeth launched into her battle plan, one that Percy had heard too many times to fully pay attention to. He knew how it ended. Gaia dead, Gaia with her head cut off, Gaia's ichor on his hands. Well, maybe that wasn't in the official plan, but it was definitely in his. He knew it by heart at this point, which was good, because Annabeth in armor talking about something she was passionate about pretty much reduced his paying attention skills to nothing. He couldn't even think of the word concentration. That was it, he wasn't concentrating. And as Percy thought about Gaia's dead body and the fact that he wasn't concentrating, he became aware that there was silence around him. He looked up, realizing he had been scowling at the floor. What? Annabeth said that someone will have to lead a team from the left side of the field, Frank filled him in. So, there was a beat. The side of the field closest to the sea, Will said, a hesitant smile on his face as if he was waiting for Percy to jump and shout gotcha. Annabeth crossed her arms, and the glare she gave him showed that she knew he had genuinely not been focusing. He tried not to smile in apology and succeeded. He felt irritation at the stares and let it slip easily into his voice. Yeah, I got it, whatever. Fine, Annabeth snapped, not looking at him. Fine, he snapped back. This was starting to wear on his patience, but he knew he had to keep it up. It was part of the plan, he just wished it wasn't. Everyone was distinctly uncomfortable now. Percy glanced around and realized that over half of the people assembled had not only never seen him fight with Annabeth, but had never known either of them from a time when they weren't together. It must be like watching your parents fight for the first time, he thought. His leg began to bounce again. Raina was speaking, hunters behind with arrows. Phoebe nodded. We will set up bases along the back, but there are others whom wish to be on the front lines. That's fine, Annabeth said. Go find your cohorts in cabins, it's time. Percy stood up, instantly about to go stand next to her, but pulled himself back at the last second, walking next to Jason and Leo instead. Jason began, you and Annabeth. Don't, Percy cut him off, really not willing to launch into an explanation he didn't have. Hey man, we get it, but you too, Leo tried. Later, he said, waving it off. The two exchanged a look, and Percy could see that they were really just trying to help. There might not be a later, bro, Jason said. Percy felt bad but irritated too. Look, he stopped them, we all have to just stick to the plan, got it? They both stared. He rolled his eyes and walked away, heading back to the front line. There were hunters digging small trenches to shoot from and a burly son of Ares shoving swords into everyone's hands. He glanced at Percy, then hurried on in the other direction. Percy snorted. He took out his sword and span it nervously in his hands. He hated waiting for a fight, hated sitting around. If he had his way, he'd be sprinting across the field right now and ripping up the ground with each footstep. But he couldn't. He was trying, for Annabeth's sake, to have just a modicum of self-control. People were streaming in from the cabins now, and across the field the monsters were mimicking them. They were coming fully out of the smoking trees, and Percy saw Polybotes and Octavian rounding them up, bellowing at them. Well, Polybotes was, Octavian just seemed to be making himself very red in the face. Gaia hadn't moved from her throne, he felt her eyes on him. This was what she had been waiting for years, and oh gods was she gonna get it. A few feet away, Raina now sat astride her Pegasus Scipio, her sword drawn. She shouted orders at the Legion, and the Romans obeyed without question as if she'd never been away. They began to sort into cohorts, military and organized, Jason right behind her. Hazel and Frank had their weapons drawn, but Percy could see them gripping hands too. Thalia was bellowing at her own people, but a lot less formally. The hunters were easily visible on the field, their ranks closed and tight, with the rest of them in a long line behind everyone, readying their bows. The silver of their clothes was almost blinding. Finally, groups of Greeks milled about, managed by their cabin leaders, but the majority just turned to Annabeth at the front for instructions, Piper and Leo at her elbows. A couple seemed to be looking to him, but Percy made it clear he wasn't their leader this time. Clarus pulled up on a red war chariot pulled by metal horses. Nico made eye contact with Percy and didn't look away, and Percy couldn't help but nod at him. Monsters were spitting at them and screeching, but Percy didn't feel anything for them. They were just obstacles. He had his eyes on the prize. She still hadn't got up from her throne. Legion, Percy heard Raina shout. Hunters, Thalia echoed. Oi, Annabeth bellowed. Percy felt glances flick over to him, questioning silently as to why he wasn't in the ranks with the rest of them anymore. He just tried to focus, and tried not to hear how loudly everyone's blood was pumping. The final battle wasn't a speck in the distance anymore. They had no more time to train and prepare. It was right here, right now. You know your formations, Raina shouted at her troops. You know your maneuvers, you are ready for this fight and you are ready to win, Cunium formate. The Romans bellowed out a bark, thrusting their weapons into the air. "We can do this," Thalia pressed, and the hunters stuck their chins in the air, "and we will, for Romans, for Greeks, and for Lady Artemis." The group of immortal girls shone fiercely with silver auras, and even Percy briefly thought that he would have to think twice before getting into a fight with them. He glanced at Annabeth. Despite most of the good pre-battle speech lines being taken, she didn't look worried. "Greeks," Annabeth shouted, and at first Percy thought she would launch into another rousing speech like Raina's or Thalia's, but this was Annabeth, and she rarely did what Percy expected her to. "Death to Gaia!" she yelled passionately, and though it was simple, it was all they needed to hear, whooping and stamping on the grass. "Glory to Olympus," someone shouted in response, inciting another cheer. "Nah, glory to us," Clarice banged her spear against her shield, and the Ares cabin hollered. The three girls stepped up to the front, weapons out. They nodded at each other and deferred to Raina's countdown. Percy span Adamas in his hand. He'd be running along his side of the field, with the Hermes and Demeter cabins at his back and the sea curled around his left hand. Annabeth's strategy was flawless, as usual. Frank, Raina, and Jason looked to be air support in the middle of the field, a melee of fighters ready to flow in beneath them. Most of the hunters were taking the far right, more comfortable using their bows without worrying about shooting other demigods, while a couple of them didn't seem that worried. He definitely saw Phoebe giving Travis and Connor death glares. He guessed she still hadn't forgiven them for giving her that cursed shirt all those years ago. He ran a hand along the cold metal of his chest plate, a contrast to the black and blood red of his sword. He leaned back on his leg as if getting ready to run a race. Silence fell across the field. Raina had her sword in the air. Polybotes held his own trident in the air, the last of the giants, mirrored by Octavian, a glowing spear in his hands. Without meaning to, Percy glanced at Annabeth and she met his eyes. They braced themselves. Gaia waved her hand dismissively. Polybotes bellowed and swarms of monsters flooded under his arms, snarling in droves towards them. "Charge!" bellowed Raina, and her Pegasus took off with a mighty flap of its wings, the entire legion behind her, the ground thundering with footsteps. Percy took the lead and sprinted forwards, reaching out with one hand and exploding the first line of attack before pulling a thick rope of water out of the sea towards him. It curled around his fist like a snake. The enemy divided and streamed toward the three closest leaders, aiming for Percy, Jason, and Thalia. When they were halfway across, the defenses kicked in. The tree line erupted in Greek fire, incinerating many of the monsters instantly. Others flailed around, engulfed in green flames. Walls of dirt rose and fell, extinguishing it quickly. Athena campers threw grappling hooks around the largest Laestrygonians and pulled them to the ground. In the woods on the right, the hunters sent a volley of silver arrows into the enemy line, destroying 20 or 30 Dracini, but more marched behind them. A bolt of lightning crackled out of the sky and fried a small giant to ashes. A wave of Impausi crashed into his sword, and Percy hacked through them viciously. The tempo of the battle had begun to heat up his blood, and he forewent the sword on the last one, punching it again and again until gold dust framed his vision. Little ants of adrenaline ran up and down his legs. He jumped up into the air using a flat disk of water as a stepping stone and landed behind a group, slashing into their ranks. Behind him, the battlefield was in chaos. No one was separate anymore, all mixed up and stabbing away. It looked like the majority of the cabins he was supposed to lead had gone to help the people in the center. He guessed they thought he had it covered, he mused as he kicked a Hyperborean giant's legs out from under him, then backhanded him, sending him soaring over the heads of the hordes of monsters. Jason yelled, "Iaculaire flammes!" and a wave of flaming arrows arced over the legion's shield wall, destroying a platoon of ogres. The Roman ranks moved forward, impaling centaurs and trampling wounded ogres under their bronze-tipped boots. Percy clenched his fist again, and explosions of gold blew out like a nuclear bomb around him. A perfect circle formed, and Percy let the crazy grin finally come out. "Who's next?" he mocked them, spitting on the ground. A figure charged, a demigod with a mud-streaked face. Guess Gaia had backups, he thought, slashing through her neck. Now this is what he had been talking about. He had missed this. This was where he was meant to be. Percy lashed out with the water, sending a pressurized blast straight through a Draconi's chest. Fighting was so much clearer now than it had been before talking to Annabeth. His head felt emptier and cleaner. He wasn't fighting in a fugue state of rage and fury. He was angry, gods above, he was angry, but he felt so much lighter. He didn't even really know why. Maybe because he had a plan to channel everything into, because Annabeth was with him. Because it felt like at least somebody on the field understood and accepted him. Close ranks, he heard Raina bellow in the background. He cut the head off the guy in front of him, then booted it into the face of the monster behind him. Feeling claws get closer to his back, he gripped the blood behind him and blew it outwards. Even after the talk with Annabeth, he admitted he wasn't going to stop using things like that. He didn't know how to. But luckily, it was part of the plan. They'd deal with it later if there was a later. Percy's chest rose and fell rapidly as he attacked a group closing in on him. He could do this. He could do this. He caught sight of Gaia sitting on her throne, watching. The familiar sensation of bloodthirst dimmed his vision a little, and he could feel his arms moving more on impulse than thought. Percy shook his head, searching for blonde hair in the crowd. He found it and grinned as he saw his girlfriend stabbed through an impulsa like an avenging angel. His sight cleared. He blew up the circle around him and used the puffs of gold to hide his attacks as he lashed out with purposeful strikes, adamas singing through the air and water invading nostrils around him. The symphony of chokes and howls around him went up a notch. The rippling power under his skin made his hairs stand on end. Percy registered after a minute or two of fighting that not a single blow had landed on him. He stamped his foot on the mudded and trampled grass, and tsunami waves shot over his head. He kept it from spilling into the middle third of the battlefield, and it shot upwards as if it had slammed against glass. The monsters fell to the ground, and Percy weaved in and out like a spearfisher, slamming his sword down into heads and chests. Yowls and snarls filled the air. The water slunk back into the ocean through the destroyed terrain. He cut the head off of a small giant and met the wide eyes of Leo, who had made it to the edge of Percy's territory. "Damn bro," Leo whistled in awe, beating at a monster's head with his hammer. Percy smiled darkly at him. A loud woof behind him snapped his head around. Mrs. O'Leary bounded towards him, her tongue out and slightly covered in gold dust. Behind her, Percy saw Maya slithering along the back line, biting at any monsters who threatened the row of both alarmed and unfazed hunters shooting over their heads. A volley of arrows released as he watched, soaring over the field and striking down a line on the other side of the field where still swarms of monsters slithered out the shadows. One arrow felled a monster a foot away from Gaia. The primordial didn't bat an eyelid. Percy narrowed his glare. Pushed forwards, hacking and shoving. He passed Tyson and his Cyclops, who were bellowing, bad dog, as they bashed the heads of the Cynos Folly and Grover and a team of satyrs dancing around with their panpipes, playing harmonies so dissonant that some earthen-shelled ghosts cracked apart. At the sight of his brother and best friend, Percy almost faltered and ran to say hello to them, but he gritted his teeth and pushed on, indignant fury powering his strikes. He would find them later. He would. Travis Stoll ran behind him, arguing with Connor. "What do you mean we set the landmines on the wrong hill?" Percy kicked the monster in front of him to the floor, impaling his sword not only through his head, but into the stomach of the impulsa behind him too. They made eye contact briefly, and Percy smirked at the look on its face before it dissolved. He turned, backhanding an ogre into the crowd surrounding him. Like a wrestler, they caught him and threw him back towards him. Percy snorted, letting the unsteady ogre run onto his blade and pushing it deeper. It exploded, and Percy jumped through the dust into the fray. He dropped his hold on the water after a minute, hands scrabbling into his jeans. Another stamp wiped out the surrounding circle, and he grinned as Riptide elongated in his hand. He changed stance to one of dual wielding and beckoned them forwards. A couple were smart enough to hesitate, but he got them too. Striking down a Cyclops with a blow to the gut followed by a stab straight through its eye, Percy panted. His shirt was sticking to his back. He funneled his sweat off of him, and the small stream wiggled down his arm into his hand, where he flung it in the face of a Dracini. The beast choked, falling over as it flooded into his throat. "Yew," Percy muttered, sending a monster flying with a flick of his wrist. "That's just gross, man." A roar echoed over his head, and he kicked a monster back, narrowing his eyes. Oh, if he wanted to go, Percy would go right now. And it looked like it was time. Hollowboats was dealing with what looked like the party ponies in Chiron, but Percy saw his glare was focused on him. He capped Riptide. Hollowboat smacked aside the centaurs below him and seemed to wade in his direction. He waved mockingly at the giant, then beckoned him over, his other hand grabbing an impulsa by the throat and crushing it. Not paying enough attention, her claws scraped his neck, drawing blood. He winced and really hoped Hollowboats didn't see that. Percy and Hollowboats shoved through the swarms towards each other, and soon the monsters were just fleeing from both of them. "Perseus," Hollowboat snarled. "That's Mr. Jackson to you," Percy twirled his sword, "or Mr. Chase." He blinked, head in the game. Battle raging around them, they both charged. Chapter 61. Reyna. With the force of Bellona behind her strikes, Reyna jumped off a sinking Scipio, falling with her spear in both her hands, and slammed it into the head of a hulking Cyclops, breaking her fall and his skull alike. "Defendi Altis," she bellowed, backflipping off the crumbling monster. Behind her, the legion pulled itself into ranks once again, and a line of swords shot out to stab through the monsters in front. The ground shook underfoot, and Reyna jumped onto the back of a furry black hellhound as others fell over, praying that Percy's standing order for them to remain uneaten was upheld. While the beast seemed disgruntled as Reyna used it as a chariot through the battlefield, it didn't eat her, and that was what mattered. She cast dark brown eyes through the throngs of claws and swords, and was relieved to see Scipio had landed safely behind rank lines. The Pegasus bled visibly from an arrow to the wing. Reyna chewed her lip once in worry before shoving it to the back of her mind. She stabbed through a Dracini, bouncing from a crouch to a jump to hop over a claw that skimmed the soles of her boots. The ground shook again, throwing her off the hellhound. She rolled, coming up with a thrust of her spear. The ground trembled constantly now, trampled blades of grass blurring and muddy puddles rippling. Gaia must have finally joined the battle. Yet when Reyna fought her way clear to look over, the primordial goddess remained sat on her throne, seemingly content to watch with a serene expression. She was enjoying this. Another tremble, and another like footsteps. The giant her mind concluded. Reyna slashed an ogre in the leg, felling it like a tree and leapt atop to get a better vantage point. Oh yes, she saw it. Polybotes was on the field, thankfully in Percy's sector. The two traded fast blows, trident slamming against dual swords, two thick ropes of water lashing out like snakes around them, one clear, the other a sickly oily black. Only Reyna observed with narrow eyes. She wasn't sure who was controlling which. Both seemed to follow Percy's brutal strikes. She was wary about him and more than concerned. The Percy she had known before was not the same man now who didn't bat an eye at being covered in someone else's blood. He seemed distant and angry, and without Annabeth at his side, Reyna honestly didn't know what he was going to do next. It wasn't just the occasional tsunami wave keeping the troops away from Percy's side of the battlefield. Everyone could see he was highly unstable. Bloody hands, black war paint tearing across his face, eyes too white, grin showing too many teeth. The occasional laugh. She knew she wasn't the only one watching him slaughter his way through monsters out the corner of their eye. Adding anger and volatility to his level of power, Reyna didn't feel scared often. But this made her worry. She pulled herself back into the battle, gripping a fallen centurion by the forearm and yanking her to her feet while Argentum finished off the ogre. A pulse of warmth flooded through her hand into the other girl, whose eyes visibly brightened. "Woo!" The girl straightened up and threw her shoulders back, smacking an impausa to the floor with the flat of her blade. "Ave Praetor Ramiers Arellano." "Ave!" Reyna shouted back before crying out and hoisting her spear into the air, first spinning it in a lethal circle to clear her area. "Repeller Equites." A massive herd of centaurs parted in a panic as the legion's other three cohorts plowed through in perfect formation, their spears glinting with monster dust. On the right flank, Reyna caught sight of Hazel astride her horse, Arian, the pair blurring through monsters like a whirlwind. The mudded ground shook once more. A geyser of water erupting through the field that just hours ago had been green and undisturbed. Reyna plunged her spear through a monster, another lunging for her at the same time, and without missing a beat, her other hand ripped a dagger from her waist and buried it in the nearest face she could find. Orym leapt over her and tore into a monster behind her. Her head whipped from side to side. This was below her pay grade. Her real enemy had not yet been deployed, and her eyes raked the clashing armies for his little rat face. Oh, there he was. Right next to Gaia. Her foot slid under a spear half broken on the ground, and she kicked it up into her free hand, panting heavily in exertion. Part of her dark hair came loose from the tight braid it was in and dangled across her cheek. One arm came up as a guide, the other pulled back. Throwing her whole body weight into it, the spear shot like lightning across the battlefield, over the heads of monsters and demigods alike, and buried itself in Octavian's thigh. Reyna let a smirk curl onto her face as her longtime enemy dropped to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. Next to him, Gaia didn't even spare a glance at her last lieutenant. Reyna's victory flickered slightly as Octavian clambered back to his feet. No, she could see the pointed head of the spear on the other side of his leg. It had gone clean through. Even she would have struggled to stand with that, and this was Octavian. She gritted her teeth and watched as the augur pushed the spear all the way through the wound like it was nothing, the hatred in her chest merging into horror as mud oozed sluggishly from his wound and sealed it up. He met her eyes and a sickly smile spread across his face like a slit throat. She pushed and stabbed her way over to him as he walked over to her almost in a state of calm. An arrow flew over her shoulder and skewered through Octavian's wrist. He didn't even carry a weapon, his sacrificial dagger lay on the ground without a care. The ghoulish boy merely reached and pulled the arrow out of himself, like a slightly annoying splinter. Reyna gripped her spear tightly and shoulder-barged through the jostling throngs of people and creatures. Sure, she'd hated him for years, but before she'd at least enjoyed the private fantasy of putting him on trial and providing damnable evidence upon damnable evidence until he was finally put into a position he couldn't weasel himself out of with fancy talk and subtle insinuations. But this monster in front of her that by all rights should be dead. This thing had to die. She hated Octavian, but even he did not deserve to be this. She kicked off the face of a gorgon and her spear went through Octavian's foot before he had even caught sight of her again. Pinning him in place, she smashed the wooden shaft of the spear into his face once, twice, and again for luck, watery mud spilled from his nose. Reyna, he spoke. She yanked her spear back and sliced a line across his chest. Avila. She kicked him as hard as she could in the groin, metal boots not a flinch. Ramiers. Reyna scowled deeply and pulled her spear back, thrusting it through his stomach and out the other side with a sickening squelch. Arellano? Octavian merely gave her that same insane smile. She stared at him in horror. Finally you see it, he continued slowly. Finally I have the upper hand. You could not beat me in the Senate, now you cannot beat me in combat. Against me you are weaker than you have ever been. His cape, she realized, it was no cape. She'd seen drawings of it before, heard descriptions from those who had seen it, noted the reports of it missing. The golden fleece was wrapped around his neck, he'd never die with that on. Rather than letting her anger take her over, Reyna pulled back and breathed in. The snarls of the battlefield were loud and she kept her spear ready to flourish behind her back should she be attacked from behind. Octavian circled her unafraid, a smug look of long-awaited victory plastered across his face. His once blue eyes were a filthy burnt umber. His veins stuck out obscenely. Reyna span her spear in her hand, lashing out and nicking his jugular vein. He watched her, cocking his head to the side in a revolting display of pity as more mud flooded down his neck before the wound sealed again. Like Antaeus, her mind supplied and she acknowledged it coldly. You can't fight your way out of this one, my former rival, he grinned at her. Neither can this pathetic camp. You should have joined me when you had the chance, now Mother Earth will take you all. Octavian, Reyna spoke, her eyes catching on several options around her. Octavian, you know she'll destroy Camp Jupiter too, she'll destroy all of us. Octavian shook his head, it was as if he didn't even hear her. Rome shall rise from the ashes, stronger than ever, I will ensure it. You were born in New Rome, it's all you've ever known, how could you give it up? She spat, not everyone had been so lucky. She had not. She let out a loud whistle pattern, then engaged Octavian once again, slashing great ravines in his body from head to toe. Her last blow definitely would have blinded him were it not for Gaia. Hurry up, she thought desperately. While Octavian repaired himself, she saw a shadow flit across the ground, hovering above. You will never have the power you want, Octavian, she said coldly, reaching down and picking up a discarded celestial bronze sword, not entirely to her tastes, but she wasn't quite at liberty to be choosy. You will never be recognized in New Rome as anything but a failed dictator and a madman, a footnote in history and a mistake. There was a flash of lightning in her peripheral vision and she made eye contact with Jason briefly as he fought past. He too looked upon Octavian in a mix of horror and disgust. They nodded to each other, and Octavian definitely listened to her this time, a snarl forming on his face. You know nothing, he snapped. Prophecies are not yours to make. I can make one right now, she told him coolly. You will die here on this battlefield today by my hand. You haven't seen that, he screamed at her, cracks appearing in the dried mud around his mouth. I don't need to, she snapped back and whistled again. As Scipio dived to snatch Octavian off of the ground, Reyna jumped and landed on her Pegasus back, infusing him with as much strength as she could. Her vision briefly went a fuzzy black around the edges. Octavian bucked and howled as they shot up into the air and Reyna gripped the sword trying to keep her balance. The figures below them shrunk and charged about. A hail of silver arrows flew through the air a few feet away from her, long range from the back line of defense. Jason and Leo looked to be annihilating their corner, Annabeth and Piper nearby and doing moves that, if Reyna had the time, would have liked to observe and imitate later. Reyna. Hazel was in the air briefly, Frank diving off her horse and merging into a bear, and landing in a horde with a roar. Busy, Reyna replied, standing up as best she could. She saw Hazel notice Octavian, who was clambering unsteadily to his feet, untangling himself from Scipio's hooves, now many meters in the air on top of her Pegasus back. The daughter of Pluto saluted her and reared back before disappearing in a streak of gold. Reyna, Octavian snarled. Had this insanity always lurked beneath his politician facade? Was it because of Gaia? Could she have averted this earlier? The wind whipping in their hair and the pained howls of polyboats below, Reyna pointed the sword at Octavian, who glared at her with the burning red-rimmed eyes of the devil himself. They wobbled precariously on the Pegasus. Was a storm picking up? The sea spray flung around effortlessly below them grazed her bare fingers. Gaia can't help you up here, she said softly. The gods will help me, Octavian cried with righteous fury. They will not turn their backs on me. Reyna faintly felt a tingle of pity, then she breathed in the cold air and locked it up with everything else in the box inside her. There was no room for that now. Quick as a flash, she reached a hand out and snatched the golden fleece off from around his neck, letting it flutter down onto the battlefield like a giant moth. Why would they help the one who turned his back on them? She asked him icily. His eyes widened, he opened his mouth to protest, but Reyna had had enough of that for the rest of her life. One arm held out for balance like a circus tightrope walker, she twisted her body with her slash and cleaved Octavian's head off of his shoulders. She caught sight of his head as it plummeted down, the sightless blue eyes. All trace of Gaia's influence was gone. Like flacking clay, his head and body dissolved, caving in on themselves, a mud doll left to dry out in the sun. She stood for several heartbeats and wondered if anyone would mourn him. She sat down on Scipio, lending him more strength, and gently urged him to return to the raging battle below. Probably not. Chapter 62. Percy XXXIX. This fight has been long overdue for some time, see spawn. Polyboat snarled, backing up as the two churning columns of clear water and black poison rose up like king cobras on either side of Percy. I had better things to do, Percy replied, pulling the miniature typhoons tighter together before shooting both at the giant. He reminded himself, not for the first time during the fight, to stay in control. He'd promised Annabeth he'd try, but his attempts to remain level-headed kept faltering. Polyboats roared and stuck his hands out. He caught the blasts with a smack against his palms, the poison curling unsteadily in his grip. The water blackened at his touch. Percy twisted them both back under his command, forcing his control of liquid over Polyboat's control of poison. Polyboat snarled again as the poison threatened to smother him, but Percy swept it up over his eyes and mouth, leaving the giant to stagger around blindly. It was lucky most of the battle raged behind the pair, their fight having backed them onto the edge of the beach. Else he was sure someone would have been stepped on by now. Polyboat strained to bellow, gargling with every breath. It wasn't that he was drowning, which was impossible, but more that it was difficult to talk when half the sea was launching itself around his mouth like possessed mouthwash. He ripped his trident off of the ground and flung it at Percy, who ducked to the side and snatched it out the air fluidly with both hands. It was a beautiful weapon, fine polished metal, the three prongs sharp enough to cut the wings off a butterfly, certainly sharp enough to have already cut several shallow slices in his skin. Percy definitely would have kept it and added it to his growing collection of weapons, if it wasn't for the fact it was twice as tall as him and so heavy that the weight of it span him around as he grabbed it. Overbalanced, he fell to a knee, he shook his head and flung it to the side. Yeah, not for him. Polyboats charged towards him along the sand, his net brandished. The trees shook with each footfall. Percy swung Adama's round in a sharp arc with Polyboats disarmed. He felt a lot more prepared to end it. He would have done so sooner, but Percy was becoming increasingly aware of his next fight, the final fight. He couldn't afford to be reckless here. Get over here, Polyboats lashed his net towards Percy. The net had barbed metal spikes along the edges, designed to firmly capture and hurt whoever it caught, and Percy was determined to never let Polyboats trap him in it, like he had always wanted to. He deflected the side off the flat of his blade, charging towards the giant, a storm starting to around him like a mini hurricane. He vaulted off the knee of the giant, angling to plunge his sword in his chest. Polybotes, however, seemed to remember this move from the last time Percy had killed him. He flung up an arm and Percy, unable to stop his movements midair, caught the nasty side of a backhand. He sailed through the air and landed rolling a few feet away. Percy pushed himself to his hands and knees, spitting out some sand. The building storm dropped and he glared at Polybotes. The giant returned the look. Percy opened his mouth to insult him but was cut off. He was knocked cleanly off his feet as a small pack of ogres slammed into him from the side, sending him flying again. The sound of the battle muted instantly as the sea enveloped him, bubbles streaming from his nose and the gaps in his armor. He floated in the clear water for a second, catching his breath, and laughed aloud when he saw the ogres plunge in after him. "You can't be serious," he grinned in disbelief at them. The lead ogre, his cheeks puffed out as he held his breath, waved a nasty-looking club at him. It lost all momentum in the water. Percy raised his eyebrows. He made a go-on-then gesture, settling on the ocean floor with his legs crossed. This should be good. He propped his chin up on his hand and watched with fascination as the ogres began a hesitant breaststroke over to him. He felt for the ogre at the back of their little trio with a lazy twitch of his fingers. Its blood was thick and sluggish, and Percy held it for a beat or two while deciding what to do with it. He settled on simply pushing it out. As the lead ogre began to grin menacingly as it got closer, thinking Percy was in his sights, he failed to notice the sudden flurry in the water behind him. The middle ogre didn't, treading water dumbly as it watched its friend thrash around, its own stubby fingers closing over its face. Percy tilted his head to the side and the ogre exploded in a poof of gold that sank slowly down through the water. Percy stretched out his hand and removed a large cube of water from all around the second ogre. It fell to the drying sea bed with a crash, looking around in wide-mouthed confusion at the sudden air. Percy smirked. He hardened the water on either side of the little air pocket into walls, like one of those machines that crunch cars into little cubes. He flicked his wrist and sent them flying into the ogre, who barely had enough time to raise its hands before Percy effectively sandwiched it. He let the sea flow back in and filter the dust out into nothing. Percy heard a huge splash from a few meters away and grinned, feeling the shape of Polybotes invading his domain. The last ogre, swimming closer and closer, face purple with a lack of air, stretched out a reaching hand towards him. "Yeah, no, gotta get back to it." Percy uncrossed his legs and gave the almost victorious ogre an amused glance. "Bye." He pushed water into the ogre's mouth and nostrils and solidified the water around the lumpy ankles, the heavy weights pulling the now drowning ogre to the ocean floor, then turned and swam his way over to Polybotes. Underwater, the fight shifted dramatically from weapons to liquids. Polybotes shook his dreadlocks. A dozen serpents swam free, each one lime green with a frilled crown around its head, basilisks. The giant hurled a lance of poison at him, noxious clouds expanding around him, filling the water like thick cigar smoke. Percy caught it and sent it back, a plume of bubbles streaming out at the speed. Yet despite his large size, Polybotes thrived underwater like he did and dodged it easily. Percy grabbed his blood and wrenched it, but suddenly found the water turning rapidly black around them. It was like an oil spill, he couldn't see anything. And while he could keep the poison off of him easily in his little air bubble, the overflowing fumes made his head swim. Ackley's flickered in his head and Percy clenched his fists in a burst of anger. The sea was his domain, and he wasn't going to let the giant congest it any further. Closing his eyes, Percy yelled hard enough for his throat to twinge. He felt the vacuum in the ocean for a split second before the water flooded back in to fill the sudden gap, Polybotes having been flung bodily by a pressurized geyser that left the power under Percy's skin tingling. He crushed the remaining basilisks from the inside. He grinned, flushing out the rest of the poison and kicked to the surface. As his head broke the waves, the clangs and screams of the battle snapped back into focus. He heard fire crackling in the distance, the sun hot on his face, and pushed himself the rest of the way up until he was walking back to the shore across the water, completely dry, eyes fixated on his target. Polybotes was sitting up on the sand, spitting with rage, effectively looking the part of a beached whale after Percy had so unceremoniously ejected him. Percy hopped the last wave, watching Polybotes closely. The giant stood back at his full height, multiple times taller than Percy. The ice in his eyes was cruel and unkind, and Percy returned the glare with a matching harshness. "Weak, you may have beaten my brothers, but you cannot best me," he snapped confidently. "I already have." Percy didn't take his eyes off him, "and it wasn't like your brothers put up much of a fight," he added. "That wasn't what I heard." Polybotes clenched his fists, but a nasty smile was on his face. "Oh yeah?" Percy turned at the last second to run through a telkine that had got too close. A wave crashed to the shore with more force, sending a wave of sea spray over the roaring battlefield. A spear landed in the gap between demigod and giant, sinking into the sand. Percy glanced up but saw no one rushing to claim it. A weapon gone astray, he guessed, jerking his head back. Polybotes sneered, "I heard Koyos and Krios had you beat." Percy narrowed his eyes and gripped his sword tighter. "Oh really?" he asked. "Didn't realize you recognized Titans as siblings nowadays. Thought you were all still angry at them because Mummy played favorites and you didn't like second place." Polybotes didn't take his bait, a surprise from the usually arrogant giant, but Percy realized with a cold feeling that Polybotes clearly had more to say. He cursed it out loud when he saw Polybotes scoop up his trident. For all he had been watching him, he hadn't seen him get that close to it. He stamped a foot, a small plume of water drenching the spear in front of him before he booted it up out of the sand and kicked the base of the shaft towards Polybotes, guiding its way like a missile. Polybotes smashed it out of the air with his trident and it fell to the ground, broken and discarded. They began to step evenly backwards towards the raging battle, their eyes not leaving each other. "I heard they took my ideas on what to do with you," Polybotes said, making the first lunge by swinging his trident at him. "It made me wish I had been there." "Gods forbid you all start to think independently for once," Percy grunted, deflecting the blow and returning it with equal force. He locked his sword in between the prongs and twisted it, trying to disarm the giant again, and they strained against each other. Percy gritted his teeth and the earth shook under his feet in response, but it wasn't what he wanted. He shook his head. He would need a lot more concentration to cause a bigger earthquake. Arms shaking, Percy glanced around. Surprisingly, it looked like there was only about a quarter of Gaia's army left, and those that remained were being methodically pushed back into the trees where volleys of arrows would strike them down. It would have been a nice sight if it wasn't for Gaia still sat there serenely. His blood boiled just looking at her. Control, he reminded himself. He and Polybotes were almost in line with Gaia's throne and demigods were getting closer, looks flicked warily towards the battling pair. "I heard they messed with your mind," Polybotes hissed viciously, his voice crawling across the battlefield. "Chewed it up and spat it out, made you hallucinate your little friends coming to rescue you again and again." "Oh yeah," Percy spat, and in lieu of a good comeback, he yanked a wave towards him from the sea, his nose scrunched up even further in disgust. The wave crashed into the pair, turning a toxic black after coming into contact with Polybotes, and their weapons slid out from each other's. Percy slammed wall after wall of the poison into the giant, pushing him further onto the battlefield. Polybotes threw a handful poison aimed at his eyes and Percy slapped it out of the air without touching it. They both moved like an agitated river and traded blows like blurs. Percy never stopped his attacks, his arms constantly moving, his feet stamping and sending shockwaves through the ground. They weren't even touching each other at this point. Whether that was Percy holding back or Polybotes determined to not be struck by Adamas, he didn't know. Hatred for the giant festered low in Percy's stomach. Hatred for giants in general, for titans, for monsters. He took to dual wielding again, spinning Riptide and Adamas in his fists and ran, slicing two deep cuts across Polybotes' Achilles' heel. The monster buckled, but he turned his gasp of pain into a disturbing laugh. A wall of poison bearing down on him like a tsunami distracted Percy, who froze it in its path with an outstretched hand. "I heard they kept you chained to a wall in the dark," Polybotes was still talking behind him. Percy shoved the tide of poison back a little further than he meant to in his anger. He didn't want to think about that. He turned and sank his grip into the ichor in Polybotes' ankle, sending him crashing to the ground with a rumble. Droplets of poison rose out the grass and shot towards him like thousands of shattered glass shards. Percy had to divert his attention, and quickly found himself stuck between the huge wave and the beads of poison hanging in the air. He saw Polybotes pushing himself up. "Heard they beat you bloody every day," he said, "that they made you scream like a crushed Mpausai." "Shut up!" Percy's voice shook with a rising fury that was slowly mooting out all the background noise of the battle. Polybotes was visibly enjoying taunting him. "Didn't you start hearing voices, or was it just one voice?" His jaw clenched before he could stop it. He wasn't thinking about that. It had been a trick from the god of the pit, a trick from Gaia, a spirit playing games. He hadn't gone crazy, not even for just a tiny fraction of a second. He gathered all the fragments of poison in the air and with a clench of his fist pulled it all into a bubble, pushing it behind him to merge with the larger wave, turning his back on the giant for a spilt second. "They taught you some of our mother tongue," came over his shoulder, not a question. At that, Percy tensed. He rounded on Polybotes, eyes blazing. Without even thinking about it, he reared his arm back and threw Adamas as hard as he could, tattoo alive and churning across his skin. It shot into Polybote's stomach and the giant doubled over, crashing to the ground with a tremor that nearly knocked Percy off his feet. Nearly. Polybotes choked and coughed, but his ichor-seeping mouth still curved into an eerie smile. He said a sentence in a language Percy didn't know but recognized with ease. It was almost all Krios and Koyos spoke to each other, the tongue of the old times. Percy felt his skin crawl, the wave of poison behind him dissipated into the air. He only knew one word in that language, they had only taught him one word and he would give anything to not know it, to not have been forced to say it over and over. Polybotes smirked at him. Percy felt a splintering in his nerves and his eye twitched, he capped riptide. The giant said the word out loud. And Percy snapped. He flung himself at the giant, Adamas slapping back into his hands so hard it almost hurt, bringing it down in a vicious arc, and he cut Polybotes' hand off. Percy grinned savagely, eyes alight with victory as Polybotes howled in agony, falling backwards to grasp at his missing appendage. Boiling hot ichor flooded the trampled grass and Percy levitated it into the air before sending it back towards the giant, cramming the molten liquid into his eyes. He bucked and twisted on the flattened ground, looking strikingly similar to the Cyclops that had made the mistake of killing Damason. Polybotes repeated the word in the tongue of the old times desperately, not as a taunt this time, as a plea. Percy pushed the ichor in further. Guttural sounds escaped the giant, the one who had claimed so many times to one day take Percy and torture him until he broke. Percy's lip curled. Never again. He pulled the evaporated poison back out of the air and it slid through the grass like snakes to funnel into Polybotes' eyes. He stepped closer to the giant, not quite yet registering the silence that had fallen over the battlefield, and let the liquids fall. He wanted the giant to look at him. Polybotes blinked burned red eyes back up at him. He repeated the word. Percy said it back, the familiar yet inhuman sounds rolling off his tongue like oil in water. He didn't even know how he would be able to spell it in English. He phrased it as a question. Please, Percy mocked ruthlessly, please. Drilled into him over and over, sometimes when the Titan had entered the cave, Percy had started saying it before Koyos could even start hitting him. Koyos had liked that sometimes. Percy had just wanted his wounds to stop bleeding. Please, Polybotes pressed. Percy snorted coldly. The smile he felt curve onto his face was far from kind and he didn't even care. The image of Polybotes flickered, other monsters appearing, other gods, monsters that had taken Percy and ripped him all up inside until he was all sharp edges and pain. He span Adamas around in his hand. You're joking, right? He said quietly. Please, that wasn't what you were saying earlier, Polybotes. The giant glared weakly at him through blistered eyes. An idea struck Percy and he mulled it over with a tilt of his head. What exactly was the liquid in eyes? Should we find out, folks? Percy murmured to himself, burning power under his skin, and held his fingers up to snap. Wait, he caught himself just in time. What was he doing? Percy stiffened, staring at his fingers. Had he just been about to? Things were different now. This wasn't the pit. He couldn't do whatever he wanted, do whatever ideas just popped into in his mind up here. Why not? Another part of his mind argued. Monsters are monsters. Annabeth, another part said firmly. You know you can do it, a voice spoke and Percy jerked that voice wasn't one of his. He tilted his head slightly, looking away from the panting giant and stared at Gaia with tunnel vision. The primordial was fixated on him as well. Her eyes were a light green. You have the power to do it, she said, and he does not. Percy's thoughts raced at 1,000,000 miles an hour. It still worked with the plan, so technically everybody would be happy, he reasoned. But above all that, it was second nature at this point, and he wanted to do it. His hand hadn't moved from where it hovered in the air. Polybotes was fumbling for his trident, poison rising in little droplets around the pair of them, and a deep scowl crept onto Percy's face. He eased the wet weapon away from Polybotes' remaining hand with 2 fingers, sliding it slowly through the grass. Polybotes looked up at him with the same look Koyos had given him. Clay. Percy clicked his fingers and blew his eyes out. His skull followed suit. The giant's high-pitched shriek of pure agony vanished into the mass of seaweed, reptile skin, and poisonous goop that burst into existence, globs of bloody black splattering over him. Percy wrinkled his nose and raised his eyebrows. He'd forgotten that polyboats just had to be special, too good to turn into gold dust like the rest of them. Though it was a little more satisfying, he reflected, poking a bit of the skin with the tip of his trainer, his absolutely no longer white trainer. It was the absolute silence that eventually caught his attention. Percy lifted his head. The battlefield that had been raging and screaming mere minutes ago was frozen. Every single demigod was half sunk in the earth, mud up to their waists, swords and spears held uselessly. Annabeth, Frank, Hazel all immobilized and watching him. Annabeth locked eyes with him for a heartbeat, both of them keeping their faces blank. Centaurs were now only visibly human. Satyrs too. The remaining monsters were free to roam but lurked in the shadows of the trees almost as if they were afraid to come out. The hunters were in a similar position along the back row, all their bows and arrows out of their reach. The Pegasi's wings were locked in their dirt tombs, Maya submerged to her neck, Mrs. O'Leary barely visible. Percy realized he was the only one left untouched. A cold feeling ran up his spine. He looked at Gaia and she stared right back, entirely focused on him. "I have waited for this day for a very long time." Gaia's voice was soft and gentle like a running brook, and not what Percy expected from the psychopathic primordial goddess at all. "I was informed by Medea that there were two ways this could have gone, and I much prefer this ending." Percy had no clue what to say, so he stayed quiet. Luckily, others were not as confused. "What, you been counting down the days on your little calendar or something?" Leo's voice was full of sarcasm and anxiety, but it carried well for someone up to his neck in dirt as he impersonated the goddess. "Crossing it off all 52 days till I destroy civilization." Gaia glanced at him. "Storm or fire?" she said, and Percy frowned as he recognized the line from the prophecy. "To storm or fire the world must fall." "You were fire in another life," she told Leo, who blinked. "Strong and resourceful, it is why I watched you from such an early age." "You killed my mother," Leo spat, but the mud slid up over his mouth like a gag before he could carry on. "Storm was unknown to me for some time." Gaia ignored a struggling Leo and turned her eyes on Percy, who had stepped forward to help him. Mud crawled up to his ankles, sticking him in place. Percy tried to yank his feet out to no avail. "And then a young and powerful son of Poseidon helped murder his stepfather, and I knew." "Oh, sticks." Percy stopped straining and glared straight ahead, blanking out the many sudden glances in his direction. Only he, his mum and Paul had known about that. Maybe Poseidon, but it wasn't like he could deny it. The most he could do was protest that his mother had technically done it with the head of Medusa that he had given her specifically for the job, but he didn't think that would help his case. He shrugged internally. It had been one of the best decisions of he and his mother's lives. "Not that I don't approve," Gaia continued in the same kind and understanding voice. Percy thought it almost sounded genuine. "Aranos was abusive to me and my children too. There is no other option for beings like them." Percy didn't dignify that with an answer either. "Since then, I kept an eye on you especially," she said. "I'm so proud to see how far you have come, how much you have realized you are capable of. Hearing how you really began to explore your limits down in my husband's realm without the gods holding you back was quite intriguing, though I do wish you didn't have to use such methods on my sons." Percy spoke without thinking. "They deserved what they got." Was that his voice? It didn't sound like it, much too blunt, too full of spite. He gripped the handle of Adama's tightly. She didn't have a weapon, but she didn't really need one. She was still sat down, for God's sakes. "Yes, I do suppose they were rather unkind to you." Gaia trailed her index finger over the tree roots that made up the arms of her throne. "The Olympians wouldn't, but I could perhaps condone cutting off Creo's arm and wiping his memory in the Lethe River. However, destroying Koyos from the inside by controlling the ichor in his body to fight my husband, a little too far, don't you think, my little god killer?" Percy's jaw clenched. He was wrong again. Gaia did have a weapon, and it was apparently the truth. "I made him a promise," Percy replied evenly. "That you would kill him," Gaia nodded. "I know." Percy frowned. "How?" "My husband told me," Gaia smiled at him, all teeth. "You did meet him, no?" Percy didn't speak, his eye twitched. Gaia laughed. It sounded like a distant earthquake. "Yes, he told me all about you, how you disobeyed the rules in the arena, then broke out of your cell, and how much he enjoyed hunting you down." The god of the pit flashed before his eyes, and Percy found himself seething, glaring at Gaia. She looked at him sympathetically. I do find myself slightly surprised though, I must admit. I would have thought the Olympians would help you if not pull you out completely. But they never have really cared about anything other than themselves, have they? Their minds were messed up, Percy said dutifully before adding with spite, your fault. Hera's fault, Gaia corrected him smoothly. Okay, true, but... Because of you, he pressed. Because the Olympians were yet again ready to throw their children to the wolves, quite literally in your case, she added. Lupa, Percy began hotly in defense of the wolf goddess. Is just like the rest of them. Not one of them came to help you even after they had their identities back, did they? Not one. Not your father, not Hades, not even the Fates who would know that you did not belong down there. Percy knew exactly what angle she was playing. By the look of horror he caught on Chiron's face, he had realized too. So why fight for them, my little god-killer? Gaia smiled softly at him. Why suffer again and again for the same gods who once voted whether or not to destroy you right in front of you, who left you and your mother at the hands of your stepfather for so many years, who erased your memory and stole months of your life? Percy looked at the ground, he shouldn't listen to her. Percy, Chiron shouted suddenly from several meters away on his right, twisting in the grip of the muddy ground, his eyes more alight with emotion than Percy had ever seen before. Please do not listen to her, MMPH. More mud flooded across his mouth and he was clearly fighting hard to keep shouting. No, I will not NNGH fail again, MMNG Percy. The centaur fell silent and motionless, but his eyes still begged with Percy, who couldn't look at him any longer, and let his eyes drop back to the ground. You know how it feels to not be able to fully trust anyone, to have to do whatever you can to watch your own back. I respect that, but will the Olympians? They aren't even here to fight alongside their children. Percy did wonder. No one had turned up to help him fight polybotes, which meant they had either listened when he said he could do it himself, or just hadn't bothered to show up. Now that he thought of it, they were probably all lounging on their thrones on Olympus, watching them on Hephaestus TV. That is, if Dionysus didn't get bored and change the channel. And they know about the majority of the things you've done, said Gaia, breaking into Hades' palace and threatening him, murdering Apate for tricking you, killing that son of Ares. Oh, Percy winced at that. If Ares knew, then he'd no doubt be arranging something nasty for him if Clarus didn't knock his lights out first. I'm not sure Zeus is the type to forgive and forget things like that, my godkiller. She tilted her head pityingly at him. Oh, and you are, he asked her. Sometimes gods are too petty, always cursing each other. She smiled softly at him again, and I think we both know how curses turn out, don't we? Percy winced again, thinking of his once shattered leg. There is a reason I do not bring Arai to battle, she told him, watching him closely. We have all been cursed at some point, and too many things can go wrong, especially taking into account those who have cursed you in the first place. Yeah, I know. Percy glared at a telkine in the shadows of the trees, and it backed away with a whine he could barely hear over the sound of the waves from the beach. But Gaia shook her head slowly at him. You misunderstand me, she told him. I speak not of the physical curses you received. Percy frowned and narrowed his eyes at her. What? He asked, genuinely confused. 10 Arai killed, 10 curses, 9 wounds, and Arai never forgets. Did you not pay attention to my son Damieson? She asked gently. Percy began to feel sick to his stomach, the blood draining out of his face. He was missing something big. What could a curse be if not an injury? What was it Damieson had told him so long ago in that little hut? He said it could be bad luck, the inability to find something necessary, and... Gaia's eyes pierced him, and his mouth went dry as he remembered the words. No. No. If Percy could move a single muscle, he would have bent over and thrown up. His jaw had dropped open, and any hope of retaining his tough guy face had curled up into a ball and died. The way she was talking it almost could mean, but that wasn't true. That couldn't mean. The loss of a loved one, Percy heard himself whisper. Without thinking, he turned his head in horror and made eye contact with Annabeth. The loss of a loved one. The Arai hadn't forgot. Her mask had dropped too, he noted distantly, as she began to shake her head at either him or Gaia, he didn't know. No, she denied vehemently. No, that wasn't. Percy opened his mouth but found he had nothing to say, his eyes prickling instead as he stared at her. His hands were shaking harder than they ever had before, and he could feel his sword slipping out of his grip. Something rose in his throat. Annabeth had died. He had killed an ally. No, he choked. Someone had cursed you, Gaia spoke calmly to him as if he was a startled animal, to feel the same pain they felt when they lost someone they loved, blaming you for their death. It could be someone you know, someone you trust. Percy's mind still wasn't thinking clearly. He looked out to the beach, his vision blurring, and dimly realized that the sea was absolutely frozen in place. The water didn't have the slightest ripple on it. Percy, he heard Jason shout, she's lying. I'm not, Gaia said simply, and Percy couldn't help but believe her. He heard more of his friends start to shout behind him, but all their pleas and insults to Gaia blurred into a roaring noise in his ears. One by one, he heard them all get cut off, Gaia's mud gags striking again until only one remained. Percy, you couldn't have known, Annabeth shouted, her arms trying desperately to push herself out of the ground, seemingly abandoning their plan. It wasn't your fault. She's right, Gaia nodded gently and Percy's head snapped around. How could I, he rasped, a lump the size of a fist in his throat. She had died because of him, dead because of his actions. He had killed her, he had killed Annabeth. The blame rests on the gods who allowed it to happen, Gaia said, on the fates who ensured it, and on the one who cursed you in the first place. He was pretty sure that every wound on the entire battlefield had stopped flowing at this point. The lake wouldn't be moving either. If it rained, he suspected the rain would simply just freeze midair. Perseus, she said his name like it was a prayer, my irreplaceable godkiller, I know the one who cursed you. Percy swallowed. Who, he asked, and his voice came out rough and scratchy. Can you not work it out? Gaia asked him, not unkindly. Someone who has hated you, someone who has wanted you not only dead but to suffer an agony they know personally. That doesn't narrow it down, he said, almost feeling the hysterical urge to laugh as muscles in his body twitched. What if I told you it was someone you consider a friend, someone you trust, someone you have fought back to back with before? A feeling like an expanding balloon was filling his chest. He didn't know what would happen if it popped. What if I told you they were here now? Gaia said quietly. Percy stared at the ground for a long minute. He closed his eyes, and felt the heartbeat of someone on the hushed battlefield get quicker and quicker. He felt their body trembling, blood spilling as they bit the inside of their cheek harshly. Percy didn't want to look up. He didn't want to meet their eyes because then they'd both know that the other knew. He didn't want to blame them, didn't want to hate them. This was his fault. After all, he had been arrogant enough, stupid enough to kill the ally without thinking of the consequences. He could take the broken bones and stab wounds, he didn't care. But not her, not this. Never in his worst nightmares had he imagined this. He couldn't stop himself. He met the horrified, watery eyes of Nico D'Angelo. You thought you could trust them, Gaia said, her mouth tilted with genuine sympathy. But you can't trust any of them. You've seen the way they look at you. They think you've gone insane. They don't understand. Nico was shaking his head back and forth in denial, but it was almost to himself as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Percy's jaw clenched involuntarily and Nico bowed his head. He felt a trembling tear drop to the trampled grass underneath. It's time to leave them behind. Gaia finally rose from her chair, a wide smile stretching across her face. This is their natural end, but it is only the beginning for you and I. Many have foreseen you standing at my side. This was meant to be Olympus to preserve or raise. You are stronger than my children, but you are still barely scratching the surface of what you can truly do. Percy's mind was still going at 1,000 miles an hour, but that registered vaguely. He could do more. Like what? Was that even possible? The power under his skin burned. He felt like adding anything more would cause him to combust from the inside. I was wrong before, Gaia said. Unlike the Olympians, I'll admit it. You're not a pawn, Perseus. You're every piece on the board. She gestured to the cowering monsters and piles of gold dust around her dismissively. I never needed an army. All I ever needed was you. Percy just stared dimly at her. What was she saying? Did she know he didn't know how to play chess? Was he swaying on his feet? He couldn't feel it. Gaia needed him? He almost snorted in delirium. Of course she did. She never did her own dirty work. She had given the scythe to Kronos to kill Ouranos rather than doing it herself. He couldn't even think about what she could offer him. Imagine what you could do with more training, she continued and stepped closer to him, watching him carefully. He realized his sword was loosely being held between his thumb and index finger. She really didn't think he'd attack her. With more mastery over your powers, more control, imagine what you could do with the blessings of two primordial beings. She lifted a hand up to touch his left arm delicately. Her fingers were short and slightly green at the tips, gardener's fingers. She touched his skin and Percy's vision went black. He was kneeling on the ground and his knees hurt. That was the first thing that registered in his mind. The second was that he was somehow no longer standing on the edge of the battlefield. He looked around. In fact, there was no battlefield to be found, no Camp Half-Blood in sight. Where exactly was he? He was in some sort of throne room. The uncomfortable floor assaulting his knees was made up of thick gray flagstones, smaller ones creeping up the walls up to the high arched ceiling. Windows of stained glass fit perfectly in the gaps, glinting green and blue patterns across the room, fading slightly wherever they met the glow of the many quietly burning candles. Annabeth would love it, he thought abstractedly, even recognizing several of her favorite structural features like the eyebrow dormers he saw letting light fall down from the ceiling. It was like she had designed the room herself. Tall doors rested at one end, at the other was the throne. And the man sat on it. At first, Percy thought it was his father. He had the same scruffy black hair, trimmed beard, sea-green eyes, a little older than Percy but younger than how his father usually appeared to him. He was dressed in casual clothes, but they were fancy casual clothes. The jeans were black and smooth. The t-shirt was flawlessly white and tight, the sleeves missing but not ripped off, tailored. The trainers had never seen a speck of mud in their lives. Around the man's neck hung a necklace with a golden ring on it. It was him, almost. Because on one arm, sure, he recognized the swathe of tattoos, wincing at the inked eyes of Medusa, unable to describe them as soon as he looked away. But on the other arm. The other arm was sleeved in tattoos as well, not as menacing as Nyx's but no less intimidating. Percy noticed the central symbol on his shoulder, the filled-in outline of a woman with a spiral over her stomach, arms reaching up over her head and joining at the hands in a perfect circle. Around it, other symbols were littered, Greek letters curving round his elbow. There were trees, leaves, flowers, and what looked like some of the natural wonders of the world inked onto his arm. Everest. The Great Barrier Reef, the Aurora Borealis, it was beautiful. Gaia's blessing was certainly easier on the eye than Nyx's was. Percy stood up, his knees popping. He frowned. Why would Gaia show him this? Is this what she thought his future was? Is this what she thought he wanted? Yo, man! Percy waved a hand in Nothim's face, but he didn't even blink, cutting him off instead as if Percy wasn't even there. Bring him in, Nothim shouted, leaning forwards on his throne. He snapped his fingers and the ground split open, a shiny blood-red and black trident jumping out into his hand. It was Adama's, reshaped. Percy could recognize the handiwork of Tyson anywhere. His eyes lingered on it. The tall door split open and Frank and Jason walked in, dragging a man by the elbows. They dumped him at Nothim's feet, then saluted at him. Percy shifted uncomfortably, but Nothim just returned it with a wink. Are you coming to that beach thing tomorrow? Frank asked. Grover and Juniper say they've got an announcement to make. He wiggled his eyebrows and mimed having a protruding stomach. Nothim grinned. Of course, it'll be my godchild after all. Poor kid, said Jason with a smile. Yeah, jealous. Nothim waved his hand dismissively and they rolled their eyes, walking out. The doors swung shut. Nothim's smile faded a little. The two Percys looked down at the figure. You know, I'm really not sure how you managed to evade us for this long, Nothim said, resting his elbows on his knees and steepling his fingers. Athena, I get, but we picked her up last week. Didn't expect this from you of all people. I am a man of many talents. His voice was dry and ragged as he glanced up. It was Mr. D. Ah, you're many things but not a good liar, Nothim snorted in the god's face. Which is good for me, not so much for you. I know Artemis was helping you. Do you now, came the disinterested reply. Sure, Nothim shrugged, was being the key word. Now I'm not one for archery, but I'm sure Frank will love her bow. Dionysus sighed. If you're going to kill me, Johnson, just get it over with already, said Dionysus, the chain around his wrists glowing and clinking on the floor. Let me join my brothers and sisters. Nothim's lip curled cruelly. Oh, believe me, we'll get to that, Daedalus, he said lightly. I never liked you, I want to enjoy this. but not him stood up and the tall doors reopened, a woman waiting on the other side. I'm afraid you're just going to have to wait, it's date night, and darling, you're really not my type. Frank and Jason came in again, dragging the weary god out of the room and disappearing around a corner. He made no noise and Percy watched him go. There was something very off about all of this. The woman strode in, eyebrows raised. Her blonde princess curls had flakes of plaster in them. She put her hands on her hips, a gold ring glinting on her finger. Come on already, she said, I've got so much to show you. Even more than yesterday, not him teased. Twice the amount of yesterday, she said, I think you'll especially appreciate it. Will I now? Not him said, kissing her on the cheek and linking their hands as they walked out the room. The woman nodded enthusiastically, her gray eyes alive and excited as she spoke. We've been renovating their thrones, I know. She held up her free hand in defense as not him looked confused. I know I said that we were gonna bin them, but then I saw Poseidon's throne and I kinda looked at Sally and we were like, you know what would make a really good aquarium? And then it just happened somehow. Not him laughed. Oh, that's perfect, he chuckled. Gaia's gonna love that. Of course she will, Annabeth said smugly. It's a work of art. Not him laughed again, and their conversation floated through the doors long after they were out of sight. Percy stood there alone and listened. He blinked. The battlefield surrounded him again. Sunlight shone into his eyes from the clear blue sky and crackling of various fires filled his ears, monsters hissing at him from the trees. The worried stares from the submerged demigods bored into him again. Light as a feather, Gaia's hand withdrew from his arm and she smiled gently at him. A world free of monsters, she said, without gods, without fate. Percy didn't speak. You've had to make decisions like this before. Kill your friend or give him the knife. Fight to the death or hand your sword over to a goddess and ask her to kill you. You'll never have to make such a world-changing decision again if I can help it. This kind of pressure will never be put on you time after time, but I'm afraid it has to now. She held out her hand ready to shake, like a business deal. Perseus, she said, will you fight for gods who would never fight for you, or will you help save the world with me? He knew the answer to pick. Of course he did. He knew which one he'd choose too, the one that fit with the plan. But he couldn't get that vision out his head. They had all seemed so happy, or the fact that technically every word Gaia said hadn't been wrong. She had made a lot of points that he agreed with. She had offered him the chance to make things better, to make the people he loved happy. He hesitated. Percy suddenly felt very cold and very small on the inside. He thought about the plan. He stared at her hand and his noncommittal silence caused several people to start shouting. He even heard bleating and his eyes flicked out to catch Grover slamming his hands on the grass over and over, his eyes wild with panic. It was no wonder. He could feel exactly what Percy felt, but the rest of their voices were muffled, their words unheard, except one. Percy, Annabeth asked quietly. Switching his sword into his other hand, he didn't turn around. He slid his hand into Gaia's and shook it once. The muffled words turned into muffled shouts and thunder cracked overhead. Oh, screw you, Zeus, Percy thought angrily, pulling back his hand and sheathing Adamas on his back. He left it half pushed in. Gaia didn't even bat an eyelid, turning her gaze on everyone else. The corners of her mouth curled in victory. The mud around his ankles cracked and turned to dust, releasing him. Percy, Annabeth shouted, and he turned to look at her blankly. They all watched as she leant backwards and pulled her legs out one at a time before rolling to the side. Percy recognized it as the #1 way to get out of quicksand. She had shown him years ago when they were kids, claiming she'd researched it just in case, and clearly remembered it, despite quicksand somehow never becoming the frequent danger they had both believed it would be. For reasons Percy wasn't sure of, Gaia allowed her to stand up. A show of good faith to him. From the way Annabeth had anger written all over her face, he had a feeling she just wanted to relish in what was about to play out in front of her. Thunder rumbled through the sky again. Annabeth walked over to him, her eyes burned into him searchingly, and he stared right back. The battlefield was silent. Annabeth nodded to herself, like she'd found what she was looking for. You're going to join Gaia, she said bluntly. After everything that's happened, you're going to join her. She pointed a vicious finger at the primordial goddess, who regarded her with the same kind expression she had with him, and a lock of golden hair fell across her cheek. Percy's hand twitched to tuck it behind her ear. This is the only way to make things better, he said to her as emotionlessly as he could. Annabeth scoffed and she began to shake her head, her feet moving underneath her like she was trying hard not to pace. He understood the feeling. "You're going to abandon the gods, the camps, me," she demanded. "Percy, you can't be serious." She grabbed his hand and held it tightly. Percy allowed it for as long as he could before tugging it away from her. She reared back in indignation, putting her hands on her hips. "Gaia's right," Percy said. "The gods don't care, they let you die." Very real anger accidentally slipped into his voice. "Then why didn't you join Kronos the first time around?" Annabeth retorted. "Luke was your friend too." Percy winced. "Low blow, Annabeth." And Gaia spoke up, but to Percy's astonishment, Annabeth held up a hand like a stop sign. "Oh, you keep your filthy dirt nose out of this, Grandma," she snapped. "No one's talking to you." Gaia cocked her head to the side, her eyes cold. Percy glanced between the two of them, wondering if this was how other people felt when he talked to the gods. Annabeth broke their glare off, clearly as a dismissal of the primordial, and turned back to Percy, whose eyebrows were still raised high. "Percy," she said his name in a low voice and stared deeply into his eyes, stepping closer to him. Percy lifted his chin and went back to scowling. He stared back. A couple seconds passed and then a few more. He could hear Annabeth breathing heavily in anticipation. Others behind her looked at him in shock. "She's right," Percy murmured without meaning to. Something flickered in Annabeth's eyes. She stepped back and uncertainty danced across her face for a second before it hardened. "I see," she said. And then she slapped him hard across the face. Percy, both expecting it and being taken by surprise, felt his head snap to the side, the loud crack ringing in his ears. Die immortals, she hadn't pulled her punches. His cheek stung viciously and he could almost feel the handprint rapidly glowing red on his skin. He ran a hand over his cheek and looked back at her. One of her eyebrows twitched as she glared furiously and Percy found himself nodding to himself. "Okay, all right," he understood. His turn. Finding her blood wasn't hard. Gripping it and holding it tight wasn't hard. Seeing her eyes widen was a different story. Percy threw her bodily backwards, watching her sail through the air over the heads of demigods agape and horrified. She landed with a yelp, rolling several times through the grass before coming to a stop. Percy flinched. She wasn't moving. "Well done," Gaia said to him gently, and Percy started. He'd forgotten she was there. "You truly do have the strength to do what you must, like all the great primordials of the past, and now the primordials of the present. I have great plans for you." She reached up with a thumb pointed, rubbing some of the cold dust off of his face. He didn't move as she painted something onto his forehead with the black powder she had collected. It felt like a symbol of sorts. He thought about the tattoo he'd had in his vision, the spiral woman with her hands held aloft together, Gaia's symbol. In the middle of the battlefield, Annabeth stirred. She turned over onto her back before slowly pushing herself up to her elbows in a sitting position, waving off the attempts of those sunk in the ground around her to help. She glared at him, hatred written clearly across her face. Percy narrowed his eyes back at her. Gaia stepped forward so she was standing shoulder to shoulder with him, scanning over the rest of the people that were still struggling and gagged in the ground. Jason, whose eyes crackled with electricity, staring at Percy in disbelief alongside Hazel. Leo, looking murderous. Nico, his head hanging, his eyes closed. Chiron wasn't even fighting. He just gazed at Percy with an immeasurable sadness engraved into every line of his face. "I will now offer you all a choice. It is a simple choice and it is an easy choice," she said. Percy glanced towards the sea. He thought about how he dispersed the blood from his hand into the air. He remembered how he had vanished Polybote's wall of poison, only to pull the water vapor back into liquid form when he needed it. He twitched all his fingers like a Mexican wave. The next wave about to crash onto the shore disappeared, and if anyone noticed the slight change in rhythm of the tide, they didn't say anything. He doubted anyone would have. They were all focused on him and Gaia, and if there was going to be anyone to pick up on it, it would be the only son of Poseidon, god of seas and all that, Earthshaker, father of horses, Stormbringer, the whole 9 yards. "The time of the old gods is gone and dead," Gaia said, and a touch of arrogance was beginning to creep into her voice. Percy reached up to scratch his back and Gaia didn't even look at him. "You cannot help who your parents are, nor would I ask you to forget, but what I am asking is simply renouncement. Let go of them and the false sense of security they have given you. They cannot protect any of you, nor are they here to even try." She still wasn't saying anything technically wrong, Percy thought absently. Gaia took another step forwards, a wide smile across her face. She was standing a little in front of him now, right in the spotlight. He stood behind her loyal lieutenant. She looked pleased, and Percy couldn't blame her. She was finally getting everything she wanted, getting everything she and others had apparently seen from the start. Him at her side, the world at their feet. Was that what Nyx told him she had seen in his future? Achilles had clearly seen it too. Come to think of it, Koyos had always watched him closely, and he had been the Titan of Farsight. Had he foreseen this moment? Was that why he hadn't just killed him on sight? Rachel had been holding back on them. Everything had led up to this moment. I am no tyrant like Zeus, Gaia said passionately, and Percy felt a sensation run over him like he was the ground being warmed by the sun, pure nature. I am the mother of all. Come, my children, we have no need for further bloodshed. Choose life over fate, and I swear you will suffer no further harm from me ever again. Her pride was as visible as Nemesis had once accused it of being, her smile identical to Kronos as she made her oath. The apple had not fallen too far from the tree. She believed it was over. She thought she had won, no matter what the demigods chose. Gaia stepped forwards again, tilting the palms of her hands up enticingly. Percy's gaze slid sideways at her for a second. His breathing grew very shallow and very controlled. He caught Annabeth's eye. She was still glaring at him. He winked at her, and then a storm burst out of the atmosphere. Gaia, caught entirely off guard, lifted several inches into the air, severing her from the shaking earth. Her feet kicked uselessly. The tiny hurricane entirely encompassing her assaulted her body with vicious blasts of recently condensed sea water, slicing tiny razor-sharp cuts into her skin, flashes of lightning flickering in the churning clouds. Rain burst out in stinging drops, but the storm would not keep her in the air forever. The water flooded into her ichor, mixing with it, diluting it, overpowering it. If Gaia had been even slightly less arrogant, she would have realized from the start that taking a physical form was not a good idea. She began to screech, the earth rising beneath her, a malice in her eyes finally brought to the surface beneath all the distant kindness. The ground nearly made it to her bare feet, almost reconnecting her with her source of power. Then it all froze. Gaia jerked. The storm around her ceased, but Percy now had a firm control over her ichor and did not let her fall. Gaia blinked before dropping her gaze to stare at the sword blade protruding from her stomach. Green eyes met green eyes. Percy grinned savagely at her, yanking adamas back through her spine. An earthquake shook the ground beneath them, blurring everything, several trees toppling over with almighty booms, but it wasn't enough. He lowered her body down slightly, still not touching the ground, and readjusted his grip on his sword. His hand was slippery with ichor. He drew adamas back like a baseball bat. Ask Oranos, a dead primordial meant scattering, that meant pieces. He cut her head off in one fluid motion. Gaia's body dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. Percy barely had enough time to create a thin layer of hardened water for everything to land on like a safety net. Her head rolled along the large plate-shaped barrier several feet away, her irises empty and gray. He levitated her headless torso into the air like it was being crucified and span adamas in his hand. Gaia's arms and legs quickly dropped to the ground too. He regarded the chopped-up primordial goddess with a frown. Did he need to cut her up more? Would this count as scattering, or did he have to actually dice her up all Gordon Ramsay style? His head hurt. He looked over to Annabeth. Do you think that's scattered? He called tiredly. Annabeth beamed at him, her eyes alight and full of stars. Yeah, she replied, that'll probably do it.